apologize for this emergency item. Changes in applying for grants and getting approval from the commission made us think we didn't need to go, but apparently TGM wants a direct letter from the commissioners, so thank you for the last minute item. So the Transportation Growth Management Grant is a program between ODOT and DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development, and it's really about integrating land use and transportation planning to support multiple choices of transportation in our community. We have applied the previous year for this grant and were unsuccessful for the bicycle master plan. Since then, we have refined the scope of the work to really focus on the bicycle network on our Lane County roads, so hard service roads, and what we need to do to identify the infrastructure needs to make bicycling safe and comfortable for all users. So we are submitting a grant requesting $150,000 from TGM, and there is a 12% match. That match can be met in staff time towards the project. So we're looking for your support for this program, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions from commissioners? I'm interested in the evolving definition of the word bicycle in light of all of the new kinds of things like, electric bicycles or solar-powered bicycles, or I'm just curious, where are we headed, or what do you think we're headed in terms of the use of bike lanes, relatively underused bike lanes by other vehicles that might have that capability?
That's an interesting policy question. I am definitely a proponent of electrical e-assist bikes. I think it actually really reduces the barrier for users who are not used to bicycling and helps them. It will be interesting I think that's probably more likely you'll see that in the urban environment, but it will be interesting if that spills out into the rural environment as well.
Okay. Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. When I was first on the Eugene City Council, we had a mayor, Ruth Bascom, and Ruth spent a great deal of time on the original bike paths in the city of Eugene, which was at that time ahead of the curve, and of course it has their own name that route now. But she was always a proponent of cycling. She always cycled wherever she went. There's a great picture of her trying to go across the railway lines before they were leveled, and lifting her bicycle across there. So that was pioneering. And I look at this as, we're not in the pioneer phase anymore, but it's about time that we did something, because I look at Commissioner Bozovich across there, who spent much of his life on either the front or the back of the tandem, usually the front, I would guess.
Yeah.
But, but we have a wonderful economy of cycling. A few roads that we need to straighten out a little bit, a few roads that we need to make more safer to ride. But I'm really excited about this. I won't say it's a long time coming, because it's been evolving. And we have places for people to ride, we have places to go. And I'm excited about the opportunity to use it. And I would, once again, evoke the name of Ruth Bascom, the pioneer of cycling, I believe, in Eugene and Lane County. It's just wonderful to see this moving forward, Sasha. Thank you. I miss the MPC.
Commissioner Buck?
So this would be to create a master plan for bicycling throughout the whole entire county that includes all rural areas, mountain biking, and just road biking, or just certain items?
It will be focused on road biking, because we want to keep the scope narrow to really align with our transportation system plan, where that identifies the need for a bike master plan on our roadways, but it has not been developed. So it identifies needing to find space on the roadway for bicycle users, but we don't currently have a network prioritized.
Could it ever be expanded to include mountain biking?
It could. That would definitely be a partnership with our parks partners.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the item 1A action for the letter from the Lane County Board of Commissioners supporting the grant request to the Transportation Growth Management Program to help create the bicycle master plan.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Buck.
No, go ahead, I'm discussion of the motion.
Moved by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Burney to approve sending the letter for the grant as stated, and Commissioner Farr.
Just one other name that should be mentioned, Faith Stewart. Faith fought hard for the safety on the Railroad River Trail and the underpass that we got there. The work that he put in on rural biking will never be forgotten.
Absolutely.
Good. And physically, where is this letter?
We have letter right here. I believe we'll work with Diana to put it on the county letterhead to have
Okay,
your signature.
great. If we could do that today, that'd be great, because I'll be here at least till noon, so. Okay, very good. Thank you so much for your hard work on this and getting it through all the labyrinth to reach us. So, appreciate the, pardon me?
Are we ready for a vote?
We are ready for a vote. So, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Motion is carried, and we'll call up our friends from the Parks, Public Works and Parks Division for our next item, work session and discussion on Lane County Parks long-term acquisition of the North Jetty Park at Florence from the Division of State Lands. With us to discuss this is Brett Henry and our Parks Division Manager. And Mr. Henry, if you could introduce your colleagues at the table, that'd be great.
Well, good morning. So, as you said earlier, we're here to talk about the North Jetty property in Florence. We have Charlie Conrad. He's going to give the presentation, and as well as Blake Helms. He's with the Department of State Lands. He's going to talk a bit as well. And we have Dan Anderson. He's our ranger over there on the coast. So, all
Excellent. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. I had a PowerPoint. How do we?
Did you load it on here already?
I sent it to Diana and Devin yesterday. I think I said it was loaded on.
This is the group that didn't know if we were being taped or not, remember?
I have a printer for it, so.
Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah.
So while we are awaiting the PowerPoint, could you give us the non-PowerPoint portion of the presentation?
Absolutely. This would be actually from the first couple slides. We're here talking about transfer of property from Department of State Lands to Lane County Parks as a long-term acquisition via lease. It's not a purchase, it's a long-term lease, is what we're looking at. Blake Helms from DSL contacted Lane County Parks about 2 years ago, and we've been talking about this. And last November, we got together and we met, and we talked about what potential terms of a long-term lease would look like for Lane County Parks. And part of that will include essentially 30-year lease is what we'd be looking at, and we'd be looking at basically being able to develop that park as the community sees fit. DSL isn't going to put any restrictions on us in terms of development. So basically what we're here asking for is guidance from the board to continue on with the discussions, because as we see it, the next steps are going to be meet with the Florence city officials, talk to them about the community needs, any recreation gaps, anything that is pertinent to that park, and identify the stakeholders, and then have a public meeting out in the city of Florence, which may be a PAC meeting, we've talked about that, or a separate meeting just in and of itself to discuss this property acquisition. So that's what we're asking for going forward, is guidance from the board to go ahead and do those next steps.
How many acres is involved?
The total property is 250 acres. It's in two parcels, one 235-acre parcel and one 15-acre parcel. And actually what the park is going to do, it's going to connect two of our existing parks, because it lies between Harbor Vista Campground, which is just immediately to the south, and Hasita Beach, which is by Driftwood Shores, immediately to the north. So it's actually going to link two of our existing parks. The park itself, North Jetty, it is relatively undeveloped. There's about a 3/4 mile long roadway that goes through it. There are two parking lots, one about a half-acre parking lot that actually connects to a dive dock. And what I've been told is they want a dive dock in Oregon. I don't know if that's true or not. And then the other one is about a 3/4 acre parking lot that it provides beach access at the very end of it. So minimally developed.
Should just be able to click forward really.
You catch catch up to where we're at. And so the 3/4 acre parking lot ends and provides beach access. So in looking at this project overall, it's been going on for a couple of years. And remember, our master plan was adopted in December. And looking at, our current master plan and our master plan goals and with the strategic goals of the county, it fits under a couple of the strategic goals for the county under vibrant communities and creating a robust infrastructure. And then as we get into our parks master plan, our 6 goals that we have in the master plan, it actually meets all 6 of the goals. Specifically, collaborating and working with the community, working with stakeholders, working with the city of Florence to meet any recreation needs, any recreation gaps that they might have. And it works with connecting residents and visitors to the city of Florence in that area to the recreation outdoors. This 250-acre property is primarily going to be forested. There are a couple of lakes deeper into it. So a trail network, an outdoor recreation spot. You have the beach access clearly, which a lot of people is going to draw out a lot of people. But also if we can develop a trail network as well, get people outside and outdoors in a unique environment that we really don't have in our park system right now. And really because of the nature of the property itself being covered in shore pine, beach grass, and dunes, protecting our natural resources, and even if it might be eventually a habitat management plan, something to that effect out there. Because as you look over photographs from the years from 1950s now, the shore pine, the trees are advancing, and some of the pre-existing plant communities aren't there. It's losing some habitat that has become a little more rare. And so if we were eventually to develop a habitat management plan for that parcel, we can bring back some of those rare plant communities and provide habitat for some of the species which don't have that anymore on the coast. Similar to what we're doing at HBRA, restoring oak prairie savanna at HBRA. This would be something different. This would be a coastal plant community. So those are options, and all those are options that we discussed with DSL, and they're fine with that. The biggest thing for us is we want to hear from the community. We want to know what recreation needs and gaps are there out there that we can fill. So here's are we able to dim the lights? Can we dim the lights a little bit to see this a little bit better?
I think those do something over there.
There you go.
Thank you.
I think those turn the not light off.
Okay.
Better?
Yeah, how's
Much.
that?
Thank you.
That's better?
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. So here's the property that we're talking about, this large dark green area. Here's Harbor Vista Campground immediately to the south. And then up here is Cedar Beach, this long white line, that's Driftwood Shores. So you can see it encompasses this whole area. This dark green area right here is a large lake. In the literature, Oregon State Parks refers to that as North Jetty Lake. And then there is a smaller lake right there. And next slide. So here are the 2 parcels. Here's the 235-acre parcel. Here's the 15-acre parcel. Both are zoned for parks and recreation and beach dunes, so we don't have to worry about any zoning issues or anything along those lines. And you can see, this is a closer up view, all of this shore pine, woody trees in through here. These contain an informal trail system. You can see some of these white lines through there, some trails. Ranger Dan Anderson has attempted to find a trail back to the lake, but he was unable to find existing trail back to the lake. So that's some of what we'd be looking at doing potentially in the future is trail development, giving people access to some of these unique habitats on the coast. Here is what the road looks like. Again, this is about a 3/4 mile long, 2-lane paved roadway. We would not be taking this over in the lease, and I can let Blake speak to what's going to happen with the road if he's had conversations with Plain County Department of Roads Division or not. But we are not taking over that part. What Plain County Parks would have would be the land, the parcel itself, and then the infrastructure that we would take over would be the 2 parking lots right here. This is the half-acre parking lot that goes to a dive dock. This is that 3/4 acre parking lot that provides beach access out there. And this is the Siuslaw River right here, so it's right where the Siuslaw enters into the meets Pacific Ocean. Currently, the only other infrastructure out there are 2 portable restrooms, one at each of the parking lots, and then there's a Coast Guard tower right there.
Who owns the Coast Guard Tower?
It's the Coast Guard.
Coast Guard. Okay.
Correct. Here are some photographs of what it looks like. So here's the roadway. This vegetation on the side is pretty indicative of the entire roadway, what it looks like. So you can see it's fairly thick brush. Here is the dive dock parking lot. So some of the infrastructure, both parking lots are gravel. And that's some of what we'd be taking on and working with the SL on. It's re-graveling, regrading, and keeping the parking lots in much better condition than they are. Here's a picture of the dive dock itself. And so the other thing that we would do prior to any long-term lease would be having a structural engineer look at the condition of the dive dock so that we know what we'd be taking on its condition. Here are pictures of the large beach access parking lot right here. So this is sort of at the entrance. The ocean's over here. Here's a picture of the Coast Guard Tower. And then again, this is facing the vegetation facing the ocean. And you can see in the wintertime, there's a lot of drainage issues, and some of what we have talked about is that we would go through, we would regrade and pave the parking lot. So currently, Oregon Department, State Parks, they have this, they spend $3,800 to $4,000 once or twice a year to re-gravel the parking lots. So one of the ways that we would go through and try to eliminate that ongoing regular maintenance cost is by blacktopping up front and eliminating some of the drainage issues that it has. In looking at this, we had a couple traffic studies done. We had one done in 2017, but there are some issues with the hoses, so I did not include those numbers in the packet or up here. But our traffic study, our county right-of-way in somewhere right around this corner right now, and that's where we had our traffic counters at. And we averaged 272 cars per day, so it is a highly used park. And if you look at the numbers that State Parks provided us for the last 3 years with 2016, 17, and 18, 128,000 high and 105,000 low. So over an annual basis, there are a lot of vehicles. This is a highly used park, and I think this is something that if Lane County Parks were to take over again with some development and meeting the community needs, there are a lot of things we can do. There's a lot of potential here. When we met with State Parks to get a sense of what their ongoing maintenance costs are right now, here are the costs. Just $3,600 for the 2 portable toilets per year. Again, the gravel is $4,000 once or twice a year, depending on the potholes and what they have to do to fix the gravel. Their regular maintenance schedule, they have a couple staff members that go there once or twice a week for an hour or two for the most part, litter, cleaning bathrooms, some basic maintenance there. And then annually, they schedule time to clean signs, go through, do some much more intensive cleaning. And then the vegetation, again with this roadway here, the vegetation, it takes them 2 to 3 staff members about a week to get that taken care of. So in terms of how intensive the maintenance of it is, it's not maintenance intensive, particularly compared to some other parks that we have, or more developed parks that we have in our system. The lease terms, again, we'd be looking at a long-term lease, 30 years is what we'd be looking at, so that way if there are any capital investments that we put in the property, that we get a return on that, and that it's not a short-term contract. And really the use again is open. Some of the thoughts that we've had is based off the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, SCORE, primitive camping is something that's sought after throughout the state. With 250 acres, this might be a site where we could put in some primitive campsites, again, if that's a community need and a desire. We might do something along the lines of enhanced aids, put in shelters, picnic tables, reservable areas, something along those lines if that meets the community's needs. Or trail improvements, or add some interpretive elements. Again, with a coastal vegetation and habitat in the dunes, I think there's a lot that we can do for interpretive elements for the community out there. To put a range on this with costs and with revenue generation, because there aren't any reservable sites, there's really no revenue generation other than charging parking fees. Currently, it is free to use, and so that would be one of the issues that we'd be talking about with the community to see what we could do to mitigate going from a free park to charging $4 day passes as we do with the rest of our system. And it's difficult because we don't have the background data to really arrive at an accurate estimate for what that revenue would generate. I provided a couple bookends. Hasita Beach, which is just north and has about 14 spots, generates about $25,000 annually. And then HBRA Mount Pisgah generates about $90,000 annually just from parking revenue. So if we were to achieve either one of those numbers, and I think we would exceed those numbers with the number of cars that go there, we would more than generate enough revenue to reinvest back in that park to support our staffing needs and support any infrastructure or capital improvements in the park. So essentially, the park could be self-sustaining, depending on what the capital improvement needs are gonna be, and it might generate more revenue for the park's overall operations budget, which is again, something that was in our master plan of looking to take on and only acquire parks that can support themselves and that can add revenue to our system. And to do this, we'd be looking at, right now initially, if we added a half-time position during the recreation season, a 1040 position, and then if we had an extra help position during the winter, we can accomplish most of the tasks there. And again, looking at pavement and taking care of some of the ongoing maintenance and try to eliminate those with an upfront project with the parking lots. We would add an extra portable toilet there to help meet the needs, again, with all the vehicles that are used there and how regularly it's used. It'd be a nice, another amenity that we can do. We'd also be looking at changing the park a little bit in terms of how it functions. Currently, it's open 24 hours a day and it's free. There is some unauthorized use that goes on there. There's some household garbage that gets dumped there, things like that. We would put a gate in there, and we would work with our caretaker at Carver Vista Campground to open and close that gate. So there's some things that we can do to secure the property. And in looking at the traffic studies, there is support for an average of a car an hour all through the hours of the morning to go out to that parking lot and use the beach in that area. So we would want to change that. We'd want to curtail that use a little bit, spruce it up a little bit. And again, the biggest thing would be going from a free to now charging parking for that. And one way that we can do that is we would look at phasing that change in over time. You know, we'd meet with the community, and if we were to take this on and sign a long-term lease, you know, potentially we could look at a 6-month period where we just have signage. This park is now changing from free to a $4 fee, and then, you know, for a 6-month period, something along those lines, and for another 6-month period, we'd simply issue warnings. We would not issue any notice of the violations, any citations, to give the community and the public really along a year-long time frame to get used to the change. And during that time frame, we can reinvest money back into the park, show them why it's beneficial, why they need to support parks by enhancing the amenities and, you know, any development or anything that comes along from our public meetings, we can reinvest in that park. And are there any immediate questions for me? And I've got Blake as well, and Blake was going to say a couple words on the side from ESL.
Do you want to have Blake speak, or do you want to hear the questions?
Let's do a question. I mean, I don't have much to say. I can speak about the background of, you know, how we see this property, what our long-term goals are, and how, you know, partnering with Lane County kind of meets those goals. But if you guys have questions right now, it's a good time to kind of jump into it.
Okay, Commissioner Farr.
First, Mr. Chair, I'd like to congratulate you. On a Wednesday meeting, you've saved all the good news for today. This is really delightful. Charlie, great presentation. I love you in this role compared to your last role, which I loved you in also. This is much more fun.
Thank you.
That beach, Harbor Vista Beach right there, is one of the most accessible beaches as far as Lane County beaches until you get north of Mesita Head. Devil's Elbow State Park is pretty accessible. That's where the lighthouse is, and a lot of people do use that. But really, if you, this came to light for me clearly this week when my sister, my wife, excuse me, she's not my sister, was taking her sister
Over the years.
to the beach. Still in 8, and her sister is mobility impaired, and she said, "Give us what's the best beach to go to?" And we usually go to Devil's Elbow. Cape Creek. Her sister, there are rocks there, it's hard to get across. And I was thinking, and I racked my brain, I thought, well, you know, really the only place to really access the beach for mobility impaired folks is maybe Driftwood Shores. So why don't you go to lunch at Driftwood Shores and then walk on the beach there, which is what they ended up doing. And this beach right here is a wonderful beach. However, it is difficult to get from that unimproved parking lot to the actual beach itself. And as you went through the presentation, you didn't really talk about how do we make things more accessible for people who really can't walk as far or as easily. You know, if you drive down the North Jet, the South Jetty, the park along there, wonderful beaches, but you have to go up over pretty significant dunes to get to them. And if you drive all the way to the jetty, then it becomes all rocky and it's a more difficult beach to get to there. So one thing I'd like to consider is how do we make this accessible to people who simply can't get to the beach? Because it really is an opportunity. You know, in Lane County, we have the longest stretch of Highway 101 that's on the ocean in the entire state. It's right here in Lane County. But we have few accessible beaches for people who really, you know, are able to walk around. We can all get down to them fairly easily. But it became really clear to me this weekend when Carol wanted to go to the beach, and they really had to buy lunch at Driftwood Shores to be able to get on the beach. So think about that as we move forward. How do we make it more easy for everyone to get on the beach? And the second thing I wanted to mention is the access road. It's a lovely road. I drive down it often, and it's like driving through the forest. I would hate to ride a bicycle down there because of the narrowness of the road and the curbs. Because you know there are cars, and sometimes, as you mentioned, there's less than authorized use. People speed up and down there. So we had an earlier presentation from Sasha about the Lane County Bicycle Plan. Love to see how this integrates into the Lane County Bicycle Plan as time progresses. But really, this is a wonderful presentation. I'm excited about this because when you go to the beach at Florence, Florence is a long way from the beach. And if you go to the South Jetty, beautiful long beaches, but hard to get over the hump. And if you go beyond that, you have to go up over Hasita Head and down into the state park there. And then up north of that, you get into some of the state parks that are right on the beach, but once again, not as accessible. So I'm really loving the thought of this being a county park. I'm really loving the thought of what we can do with it. And I'm hoping that by gating it, we don't cause hard feelings among the people who live there who've been able to use it 24/7, and all of a sudden can't.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll try to answer that. So as far as improving accessibility, we don't own the road, so Department of State Lands owns that road there. But as far as
Army Corps actually has an easement for that road.
Okay.
It was originally created so that they could access the jetty and create the jetty. And so we're working with them to actually see if we can have a cost-sharing agreement where they would help contribute to the maintenance of the road, because that's the whole reason why the road was built, was to create the jetty. And then Coast Guard is another heavy user of that road, just because they have the tower there. So.
But it will be a natural, obviously, a recreational access.
Yeah.
And I have a bit of an in with the.
I see that. I used to work for the Corps too. It's I like that seance.
It's yes, but I don't have anything to do with roads.
Oh, okay.
I was a combat engineer.
Oh, right on. Okay.
as far as accessibility from the parking lot, I think it's roughly about a half mile from the parking lot to the beach.
Yeah, something like
So
that. And
a handicap accessible
you go to the
ramp
jetty.
with a paved trail
Yeah,
may be a solution to that.
yeah. And
It becomes
changes-
sandy pretty quickly.
and the wind changes the sand.
Absolutely. So that, I think, how far the ramp would have to go to
Yeah.
get into the beach, and then how often that would then get covered by the dunes itself.
And in the future, maybe something a little bit further north, where north of the current parking lot, where it's a little bit flatter and a little bit closer to the actual beach. If you go to the jetty, there's a lot of sand buildup, as you mentioned there.
Absolutely. I think one way we could approach ADA accessibility is through the trails.
Yeah.
So they may not have beach access or as good of a beach access as we would like, but thinking long-term about ADA accessibility with the interpretive trails, I think that's a good.
And you all have an excellent record of accessibility in parks. Lane County's parks are very accessible.
Good.
I know that.
Well, we feel like Lane County is the best partner that we can, outside of ourselves, I guess.
Okay, Commissioner?
Thank you. So, Commissioner Wet Blanket again. Even though this is my district, the first I heard about this was reading the agenda item. So I'm a little surprised, particularly after we passed the Parks Master Plan that was questioning our ability to fund current maintenance on existing facilities, and then we're going to take on it in not a acquisition but a lease, a liability for maintenance. So I have long had issues with this, as I've had lots of constituent complaints about the maintenance on this piece. I think what State Parks spends on maintenance is no indicator of what truly needs to be spent on this park and this facility. So using that as a guide as to what it's going to cost is probably not an accurate guide, just to be honest, because I consistently hear about how poorly maintained that is, how difficult it is to find out who's responsible. It took quite a while to determine that, DSL owns it, and they contract the state parks, and had to get, legislators involved and everything else at some point to try and cure some vehicle eating potholes out there.
Yeah, it gets pretty bad.
And vegetation growth that was restricting the roadway. Just for starters, I am puzzled as to, DSL's currently paying $10,000 a year, why they're not paying us to take on this liability on an annual basis, is kind of beyond me. Why are we, I understand we might be able to make money off of charging parking, which is, I think, will be interesting to see what the dive community and some other people think of that change, because they are quite used to this being a free park and free access. The state owns the coast, and they determined that the coast is a state park from end to end. So kind of as us taking on the state's responsibility here is a little questionable for me. There are other places, as I think about how we would expand Lane County's park system, where I know that, there's an easily convertible campground on Triangle Lake that we've all toured. That would be someplace I would probably put my efforts and money in, looking towards some long-term purchase plan that would end up with us actually owning a fee simple, that thing. So I need to have more information before I'm ready to just say, yeah, I'm going to bless this. There's other issues there. The European beach grass that's caused the humongous foredune on most of this property is incredible. I regularly rent a house that backs up to this park in Heceta Beach. And by the way, this does not connect with our park. Driftwood Shores intersects that. So the statement about it connecting our parks is not quite absolutely true. But the deflation plane, the change in that over the years as I've rented that house since I first moved to Oregon, has been incredible. And the wetland that's grown because of the uncontrolled foredune and the European beach grass there is just, and that's why there's the shore pine, because it's now protected by the foredune. It was, I have, like you, I sat down with a property owner that's been there for 30 some odd years and showed me pictures of looking across that particular parcel from 30 years ago, and there wasn't a shore pine on it. She had a clear view of the ocean and overlooking that one lake that you guys were looking for the trail system, which there is a trail system to somehow or another, because they have issues with homeless campers there. So somehow or another it's accessible. You may not have found it. They're pretty good at hiding their trails. So I just want to state, I think we need to move very cautiously on this. We have a real issue in funding parks maintenance right now and taking on additional park maintenance, and I think highly underestimated amount of maintenance this facility will create. I don't know, once we start charging, whether you'll see 272 cars a day, because there are other places to go up and down the coast that aren't, and that gets to be that mixture of every other place seems to be a state park on the coast, and why would somebody buy a Lane County park pass when there's so many state parks that you can park at and get accessible? All the ones that Commissioner Farr mentioned for the most part are state. And that's kind of where I kind of wonder why this doesn't stay a state park and under state control as being part of that state park system that is our Oregon coast, that we just celebrated 50 years of the beach bill, So lots of questions, lots of concerns. Understand you might be able to make it work by paid parking. But, there are other acquisitions I think we can make work through, reserved camping spaces, so it's, I'm surprised by this proposal somewhat, and really wondering, why we're gonna take on this albatross that DSL's, had for a while, that I've heard nothing but complaints about, from constituents for the last 8 years.
Yeah, and if
Yeah,
you,
go ahead.
I'll try to answer that. So that's why we're kind of going to ease into this, and so we're talking about a maintenance agreement that would be a year long. And so that would give us some time to see, what issues there are. We could put some car counters there and get a good definite count of what the revenue would be generated by day use fees. And so, taking some time, looking at all the issues, and then having further discussion with the board of commissioners is kind of our plan moving forward. I don't want to jump into this, and so I see this as a good opportunity, as Charlie was saying, for Lane County Parks. But if it's going to be an albatross, as you're saying, and if it's going to cause us to have to, look at additional maintenance issues, then we won't take it on.
Yeah, I'm just greatly concerned because it has been a problem for DSL and state parks since I first became a commissioner. I've heard more about this particular property than almost any property up and down the coast.
So just a little history as far as why it's not a state park, or managed by the state. OPRD did not want to continue our agreement, and so that's kind of what led us to this position to approach the city. We approached this, or rather the county. We approached the city of Florence and other entities that we thought might be interested in it, so Parks and Rec did not want to take it on because they felt like the money they were spending, was more than they were getting out of it. Part of that was in our agreement. We had agreed to, I believe it was $5,000 per year to pay the Parks and Rec. They were supposed to invoice us for that. They never did, so it was years where we were not actually paying them. And in the agreement there was language that we would pay as our budget allowed. So I think Parks and Rec were not happy with the amount of money that was going towards them, towards maintenance. And I think that we could easily say some of the fault lied with the state in not maintaining our agreement. But I think that we've committed to putting funds into the parking lot, and I think addressing the parking lot is going to ease a lot of the maintenance issues. If there's proper draining, then you're not going to see the potholes build up, and you're not going to be spending all that money every year to repave it or to re-gravel it, only to see it wash away within 6 months.
May I?
Okay,
I'm
Commissioner
sorry.
Buck and then Commissioner Burney.
Is the day pass parking fees the sole source of income that you're thinking will be able to use to maintain this park?
At this point in time, yes, it doesn't have any reservable sites, shelters, anything along those lines, no other way for us to generate revenue. So the only revenue we would be able to generate would be from parking passes.
Okay. So the $10,000 that they paid somebody else is not gonna come, it would just be the revenue from the paid parking spaces?
Just a little correction. So if we were to enter into an IGA with the county, which is what we're in the works with, to kind of transition between now and entering into a lease, we have it on there as a $10,000 payment per biennium to the county.
Okay. So that doesn't
Or
really,
10,000 per year. Thank you. So 2,500 per quarter would go to the county under the IGA for maintenance.
so that's barely, barely or doesn't even pay for the staffing you wanna do, and then you want, if I read that right, you wanna split the road, upgrades between the county paying half of it and,
So if I can clarify, there are a couple things. The contract between DSL and State Parks expires June 30th. So DSL has offered and asked us to enter into an IGA maintenance agreement only with them to pick up where State Parks left off. That's one aspect of it. So what we would do if we entered into that IGA with them to take on State Parks Place, that would be running parallel with the long-term lease that we would talk to them about. The maintenance agreement would not indicate that, yes, specifically we would enter the long-term lease. It'd be a separate stopgap measure to help them out. And what that would allow us to do is to get our maintenance folks down there into it, to get a sense of really how much time it is gonna take to maintain the park, get a sense of what the visitors and the users want, give them a chance to talk to our staff directly, and our staff time to talk to them, and get a little bit of feedback from them directly. Dan Anderson's been with us 25 years, and at the beginning of his career, he actually took care of this park. So he has a little background knowledge and history from 20-plus years ago in what it took to maintain this park as it is. So with the two things I don't want to convolute the two, the maintenance agreement and the long-term lease.
I understand, I'm just thinking, if the county eventually takes this on, the road in and of itself has an easement for, the Army Corps, has an easement for the Coast Guard. Is it technically a county road?
No, it's
So-
DSL property.
It's DSL property, so, county money investing in a road that's not our money, that, I have a bit of an issue there.
We're not asking for any money for the road. There's no road maintenance agreement with this. We would contract separate I'm hoping with Lane County to manage and maintain the road. The county services the road just up until the property. And so the idea is to have Lane County service the road, we pay for that.
Okay.
And so the road is not actually in the agreement. The cost sharing would be for maintenance of the parking lot only.
Okay, that clarifies that for me, thank you.
Okay.
The thing that I envision when Commissioner Rosevich has to go to Florence to talk about this is the pushback that you'll get from the community on the parking. I anticipate that to be significant. And if you can't generate revenue from it, I would have a hard time supporting it because we don't have enough money in our parks, roads to do it. If there is support and there is actually financially enough money to do all the things that you envision with it, I don't think of a better partner to be able to actually complete what your objective is than the county. I'm just concerned about that pushback that you'll receive.
I think that's a very valid point, and I'm pretty sure that this is one of the few free parking parks along the coast of sizable parking.
Yeah.
Well, if I could just say something. So,
No, go ahead.
a comparable area is at Driftwood Shores. There's a parking lot that's south of the hotel, which is busy and it's free. And then there's our park, which is north of the hotel, and it's also busy and it's paid. And it's so busy that we're expanding.
You just add to 9 new
Spaces
spaces,
there.
yeah.
It's interesting that people will go to either one,
Mhm.
and even when there's spaces in the free one available, people will go to the paid one because it's closer access and it has access to the restrooms there. So I just wonder if maybe there's a compromise solution where the upper one would be paid, where it's closer, and maybe the lower one would be free. I think options to explore with the community,
Sure.
and maybe something that we could, work through.
Commissioner Bernie?
Did I hear you, and forgive me, sir, I forgot your name.
Blake Hellman.
Blake, thank you. Blake, did I hear you say that the previous group you had a relationship with opted out because your agency did not fulfill the terms of your agreement with them?
I wouldn't say that we weren't fulfilling our terms of agreement.
What would you say?
I would say that there was a lack of administrative, what's the word? So we were allowed to not pay because it was as budget allowed, whether or not we could pay. So we have interesting constraints as a Department of State Lands. We're funded by the Common School Fund, which funds, our education. So any money that we pull out of there is taking away from students, taking away from other projects that we work on. So when that money was not available, we couldn't pay. At the same time, we were not receiving an invoice from Parks and Rec. That's a pretty poor excuse, but that nonetheless, when you're working with such a large agency who has millions of acres of property to manage, 250 acres, where we're not receiving an invoice, it's probably not going to.
So I'm gonna.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No. My thought was complete.
Okay. So my understanding is that nothing's being asked of us and we're committing to nothing today. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
my
just to continue the discussion, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Right.
My understanding is that all of the concerns predominantly expressed thus far by Commissioners Bozovich and Buck will help you evaluate and bring back information to us before any kind of a commitment is made by the county? Okay. So I'm good with that as long as there are no commitments, as long as you're weighing the concerns being articulated. Here are my only concerns above and beyond, beyond what's been discussed. I think there's a lot of speculation here, and also it sounds to me like there's a lot of things that are not yet completely thought through. And so the next time we hear it, in addition to addressing the concerns, I would hope there'd be more specificity of what a plan would be, what things would look like. I would look for DSL to be contributing more than this particular agreement outlines, this potential agreement, so that the county did not face an arrears possibility. I think the parking estimates are really estimates because we really don't have a universe to look at to make good decisions, especially converting a parking lot where the community is used to it being free to paid. I think that may mitigate some of your estimates. So, I mean, that's all I have to say.
Would you have an annual pass like you do for some other places?
Yeah, we would do
For
the
the
annual
local,
pass, right.
the local people that
right.
use it more frequently could
Right.
get what would that cost?
It would be $40. Or we would also allow the Passport app, which is new that we have at our parks. It makes it really convenient just to pay using your mobile phone as well.
Okay. The other thing is, did the Oregon Parks and Recreation Division, did they get very far in a discussion with DSL over the state parks doing a project comparable to what we've been discussing, where a public parks agency enters into an agreement with DSL to manage these two sites, these two acreages, and that you have an agreement comparable to the one that we're now discussing, albeit broad outlines.
Yeah.
And was there any analysis of that, and can you send us any of the paperwork that they said, well, on final consideration, we don't think we can get the parking revenue, people aren't gonna pay for it, the maintenance is too high, there's too many problems, there's drainage issues, and so we can't do it, but maybe you could call Lane County Parks, because maybe they're smarter, maybe they are more nimble, maybe they could figure it out. I mean, I'm just being positive on
Yeah,
that,
there you go.
as opposed to, we're not gonna do it, so look elsewhere. Could you educate us further on what your effort was with state parks?
Well, this is funny. I took on this project pretty much when I started with the state. So I'm not familiar with whatever discussions occurred prior.
Okay.
But what I do know is that Parks and Rec essentially gave us the ultimatum of we wish to not be in this relationship anymore.
Okay, so they never did, as far as you know, they never did consider making this a state park
I think
and trying to put in a RV campground, get some revenue, gate the thing so it wouldn't have as much after-hours vandalism, and that there'd be a higher standard of care for the restrooms and all that. They never did do any of that.
From my understanding, I don't believe they did an official study to see
Uh-huh.
what they could and could not do with the property. I know that there's a draft vegetative maintenance that they put together. I can provide that for sure. And there was a lot of talk about thinning the trees and trying to take it back to a more traditional dune ecosystem.
Another question about the jetty itself. The Army Corps of Engineers in recent years has not really maintained jetties on the Oregon coast, even though there's a substantial increase in recreational boating and a decrease in commercial freighter activity on many of the ports along the coast. And so there's actually a higher risk to the public in terms of death in going over those bars. But do you envision that there would be actually use of that road for purposes of maintaining that jetty?
I don't know what the Army Corps has done in the past to maintain that, like how frequently they maintain it. That option is available to them. This is one of the few.
Because they have the easement on the road.
Yeah, they have the easement on the road.
Mhm.
It's a perpetual easement that they own in perpetuity. And then, in my time, they have not
Oh.
they have not done any work out there. Coast Guard is a more active user.
Does the Army Corps of Engineers parks function, were they ever approached by DSL? Because I remember one time I went camping along the Columbia River, and there was an Army Corps park, and I mean, it was really nice. And I'm
Yeah,
wondering
they
how
have
many,
nice facilities.
how many Army Corps parks, or was Army Corps ever approached for, because they're proximate to this?
They were one of the initial people that we reached out to. To be honest, Lane County was the only one who returned phone calls.
Mhm,
So-
Okay. All right, well, very good.
I would like to say one thing.
Yep.
As far as the previous maintenance goes, PRD was allowed to charge a day use fee. They never charged a day use fee. So they were given the opportunity to collect revenue on it, and they never did that. I think that helped contribute to the low maintenance. So if Lane County were to take this over and start charging a fee and being able to invest money back into that, I think the public would be really appreciative of the increase in services. They would see, oh, look, our parking fee has paid for a new parking lot that doesn't flood, that doesn't have a big pothole, and then this maintenance this maintenance agreement is also providing better restroom facilities or whatever that is. I think what the public needs is to see how this agreement is going to benefit them, and I think they could once the parking lot gets.
Well, I really appreciate your presentation. I think that you've heard a lot of questions and comments from commissioners, so you can consider that. You've also got the Parks Advisory Committee. You've got your discussions with the other partners, whether it's Coast Guard, Army Corps, City of Florence, our Parks Advisory Committee, and this could be a very useful thing, and it could be a very good use of public energy, both on this parts of the state and a part of the county. And if it works out and you guys can come up with something that will withstand some of the questions that you've had, and I'm sure you've had the same questions, then let's get going with it, and it'll be a great thing if we're able to do it. Yeah, Commissioner Farr.
Ever so briefly, I spoke first, and I'm gonna speak again to restate my enthusiasm. With anything we do, anytime we spend money, anytime we change anything, we have to keep an eye on what is the return on the investment. And we have small questions, relatively small questions in the bigger picture things there. What's the return on the investment going to be for the people of Lane County if this becomes an accessible beach area for all of the people of Lane County, not just the locals, but all of the people of Lane County? I have a vision of it personally in my mind, and I see nothing but good for the future. I see it being a gem, one of the gems in our crown of Lane County parks. I'm enthusiastically supportive of it. I'm enthusiastically looking forward to the answers to the questions that have been raised, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with this project. I'm excited about it.
And so we'll work on getting some of those answers to those questions, and I'll follow up with Commissioner Bosevich before we go to the community of Florence.
I appreciate that.
Sure.
Commissioner Burney.
I would like to echo that all of my questions really relate to cost benefit, dollars, relationships between state and local agencies, but I would like to reiterate, ideally, I would have exactly Commissioner Farr's enthusiasm if all of that can be resolved. I was just curious, it sounds like you've got the most experience with this location, and we haven't heard from you. I mean, what's your sense of this, if you don't mind my asking?
I think it's a real good thing for the county to get into. I've got some real good ideas, like Charlie was saying, about trails and pathways and stuff. I think we can make it more accessible for ADA. It may take a little bit of time to get figured out and worked out. And the biking part of it you guys were talking about, that can be incorporated into the trails and pathways to get down to the parking lots with the trails and pathways and stuff. As far as the fee, I heard some questions about that. When we did the fee initially, we got a lot of pushback for the whole park system, and we did lose
When you put in a fee in, were you?
in all the parks.
All parks.
In all the parks. We got a pushback. You will see a pushback on this. You will lose some people, but I can guarantee you it'll come back to where it's at now. I mean, once they see that we're adding things and making it better and easier access, we'll get our people back.
It's 20% lower than Devil's Elbow. That's $5.
Yes, sir.
Very brief comment, Mr. Chair. As we launch tomorrow into the kickoff of our budget process for next year, if you've read the budget message, then you picked up on this, but we'll talk more about it tomorrow and in the next couple weeks. I really appreciate the Commissioner's comments about return on investment and cost benefit analysis. In the budget process and in our proposed budget, we're recommending some additional one-time resources to go towards just those efforts we recognize that we have limited dedicated revenue for parks, largely in transient room taxes. And so our ability to do all the things that we need to do to maintain and enhance our parks are really limited. But if we can make investments in upgrading park facilities that actually generate more activity so it meets a service demand in the community, and then we generate revenue on top of that pays for those services and maybe even a little bit more, that's what we're trying to do creatively. So I appreciate this conversation today and just encourage you to keep this in mind as we're going forward in the next few weeks and talking about additional investments that we can make in parks that do just that have a return on that investment.
So just one final thing, I would hope that you'll also explore the possibility of grants from state parks like we utilize for Archie Knowles. Where we took over a long-term lease from the Forest Service for that campground, knowing that we were going to be able to generate revenue from the campsites, but we also did the capital work through grant funding from the state. So, that may be where the parking lot gets improved and all that. And I think we might be able to leverage that, and that's the RV fees that are accessible through grant. So I hope you'll explore that as well and maybe report back on the ability to utilize some of that outside funding for capital.
Yeah. Commissioner, in our last budget year, we added a grants specialist in Public Works, and so we'll have the capacity to do that. She's currently working on one for Armitage Park.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much, and we'll look forward to hearing more and go forth and keep doing good.
Go forth, but don't multiply.
We'll come back with 4
Thank
bucks next time.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Joe.
And while our guests are leaving, our presenters, Dr. Creer and colleagues can assume their positions down there at the other end of the table. Come on down.
I almost referred you as Commissioner. I figured that out. You wouldn't like that.
That's a long-running joke.
I'll be in touch with you.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank
So
you.
our next item up is report in the matter of presenting the recruitment and retention audit to the Board of County Commissioners. And moving down at the table is Casey Creer, Dr. Casey Creer, Lane County Performance Auditor. And for those of you who do not know Dr. Creer, I'll just introduce him by saying that the Board of Commissioners has a number of people that report directly to the board: the county administrator, the county council, and the county performance auditor. And so what we have today is a report from Dr. Creer and his colleagues to talk about the recruitment and retention audit. So have a chair and introduce your colleague there. And we set this up for about 2 hours, about an hour in presentation by you, and then questions and comments from commissioners thereafter. And And so, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Good to see everyone again this morning. Before I get started, I had presented this to my audit committee last week, and I had extra handout copies. So if anyone in the audience or the commissioners wanted to see.
Thanks, Casey.
Okay. Would you guys like one, or have you got
Yes,
it?
please.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a hard document
Yeah, I know some.
to deal with online sometimes.
Thank you.
Then I have two extras if people on the outside want something there.
I'll give you a prelude.
With people in the
Casey's
massive
narrative
audience.
brings it all together beautifully.
That is the plan. I will say, the last time I presented last week, I went into such detail, I think I darn near put them all to sleep. So what I'll do this time around is give an even more condensed version of what I presented last week. So that way the commissioners, people in the room, and the millions and millions of watchers currently streaming us live
Carl Sagan.
won't fall asleep.
So you're providing us numbers, and you're telling us millions of people?
It's Lane County, this is the best show in town. Best show in town. So welcome to this presentation of the Recruitment and Retention Audit. You already know me. I'm Casey Creer, the Chief County Performance Auditor for Lane County Board of Government. I began a little over a year ago, March 2018, so my birthday was not too long ago after that. So already knowing me, I want to take a minute and introduce Ms. Kaylee Peterman. Yesterday, in fact, the county had its third annual county day, where it brought its third annual county day, where the university and the county come together and they bring a lot of their students from the 3 p.m. program to tour about 15 showed up yesterday. So a lot of them come, they see the county, see its operations. And last year I had the pleasure of meeting Ms. Kaylee Peterman, who was a county day participant. And so this audit popped up, I needed an intern. She applied, so here she is. So I just wanted her to go ahead and introduce herself.
Well, hello, I am Kaylee Peterman. I'm in my second year at University of Oregon's School of Planning, Public Policy, and Nonprofit Management, so UPM. Second year of getting my Master's of Public Administration. I'll be graduating in June. Very exciting. I just have to finish up a capstone project working here with Mr. Mike Finch on the Open Data project at Lane County. So look forward to that soon.
And there you go.
Nice to meet you.
I can tell you she's been like an absolute dynamite intern / assistant with working here and actually getting through this audit in as timely a manner as possible. So before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge first and foremost absolutely thank God for every single one of these people. I want to acknowledge all the many people who helped participate in the development of this report. This is page Roman numeral 5 of the actual PDF document itself. But Human Resources, Technology Services, Director Holmes, Director Finch, 2 departments that were really, really, really pivotal, but then also people in the Public Works Department under Director Hurley, people outside of the organization dealing with PERS data, dealing with actual PERS, different departments, divisions. Every single person on this acknowledgement sheet played a significant role, and there are also hundreds of people who have to participate in the actual surveys that we'll be getting into. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to them and acknowledge that while Kaylee and I are sitting in front of you actually presenting on this, it was very much a team effort. So I don't want to come across as if it was just the two of us, because that is not the case. So that being said, before we get into it, the last thing I want to say is that while you all are commissioners, I've had enough discussions with each of you to know that at one point or another, if not currently, you've all been supervisors, managers, business owners, or partners responsible for staffing in organizations of your own. So I would ask that as we go through this, you not only look at it from the perspective of being a commissioner, but also just as a business-minded individual with your own workforce underneath you. This workforce, of course, having about 1,400 people. So that being said, I want to go ahead and get going. So, and matter of fact, could we dim it just a bit? 'Cause I know we're going to get into some graphics.
I know how to do that.
You do? Your administrator hard at work.
How's that?
Yeah, is that good? Is that good? Okay.
You exceeded expectations.
I got that movie.
Okay, so
When you learn new things, don't
for me, when we start looking at this actual audit, I think it's important to first understand the process that leads to these audits. In this case, there were policies that led to a risk assessment, which led to an audit plan, which then led to actual audit topics. The risk assessments themselves highlight key areas of risk. I remember speaking with y'all a couple weeks ago about, the upcoming risk assessment that needs to be done. But the risk assessments tend to highlight financial risk, lawsuits, potential financial risk or lawsuits, legal risk, publicity, public image, or just operational. So the last risk assessment was completed in June of 2015 from the former county performance auditor, the lovely Mrs. Shanda Miller. And what resulted was a 2-year audit plan that had several topics, one of which exclusively focused on the county's very own workforce. Highlighted in that particular topic were 2 things. The first observation was that the workforce could collectively retire, that a large chunk of the workforce could collectively retire at any time based on age, which could result in a labor shortfall that could potentially hinder operations. The second observation was that among that same workforce, there was a lack of diversity among the countywide employees, which posed a risk to the former 2014-17 strategic plan. So Shanda developed an audit that focused on examining the recruitment and retention practices, both overall and with a focus on diversity, to help mitigate how the potential shortfall could be handled. So with that being said, just want to remind you that this audit has 2 focuses, diversity and operations. So keep that in mind as we proceed. So when we take a look at the 2014-17 strategic plan, there were 2 priorities that focused specifically on operations and diversity. Priority 2 being the vibrant communities priority, and then priority 3 focusing on infrastructure. Now, the word itself, when we're looking at priority 2 of diversity, was never actually explicitly stated. It was implied, and we can see this in key areas such as equity, access, openness, engagement, and employees throughout. So with that being said, it brings to mind the actual question of what is meant by diversity. So the county does not have an officially recognized definition of diversity. However, a committee within the county, the Equity and Education Committee, of which Ms. Mo Young is on, actually does have a definition that they have adopted. And that is the Global Diversity Inclusion Benchmark Standards for Organizations. And it basically reads, bear with me, the variety of similarities and differences among people, including but not limited to gender, gender identity, ethnicity, race, native or indigenous origin, age, generation, sexual orientation, culture, religion, belief system, marital status, parental status, socioeconomic difference, appearance, language and accent, disability, mental health, education, geography, nationality, work style, work experience, job role and function, thinking style, and personality type. So yes, it's a mouthful. So having an understanding of diversity, I wanted to also jump back to the operations side of things. Priority 3 contained the key objective related to the operational side, which was internal administrative infrastructure. And it highlighted the imperative need to maintain a certain degree of functionality, with 3.2.A mentioning to attract, recruit, retain, invest, performing, and actual workforce. So the stage was set between the former county auditor and the human resources director at the time, Marcia Edwards, to get this actual audit in place. However, over time, there were a couple of changes that occurred that ended up affecting the way this audit would actually go about. Since June 2015, that former county performance auditor, as I said earlier, left. The former human resources director left, and a new county performance auditor, and a new human resources director, lovely Ms. Alana Holmes, we were hired. And also a new strategic plan came into place. And it had been developed to replace the old strategic plan, which you all are very familiar with. So already knowing me and Alana, I wanted to focus more on the 2018-21 strategic plan. That way we could see the same elements of diversity and operations carrying over. And this happens when you look at priority 2, vibrant communities, and priority 4, people and partnerships. Priority 2 focuses more on the diversity piece. So while we have familiar terms being carried over, such as equity employees, and access, we also have new terms such as the actual word diversity this time. And we have other terms including representation, underrepresented communities, understanding, acceptance, unique background, culture, service delivery, and all people. Going back to the operations side, we look at priority 4, and we see the need for recruitment and retention because there are emphases on phrases such as employee engagement, resilience, workplace planning processes, employee wellness, core values, behaviors, recruitment, performance evaluation processes, trainings, presumably to assume that one could continue to operate as efficiently, effectively, and economically as possible by constantly having those trainings. Which brings us to the updated purpose of the recruitment and retention audit. So with the new HR director, with a new auditor, and a new strategic work plan, there were changes in the county, not to mention the county also hired Ms. Laura Benson, the recruitment and selection coordinator, Mrs. Mo Young, the equity and access coordinator. So with so many different processes already taking place, whereas the former audit, well, let me just backtrack. I wanted to say that the focus of this audit went from focusing on the processes of recruitment and retention to the actual outcomes of recruitment and retention. Whereas the original purpose of the audit focused on determining the effectiveness of recruitment outreach efforts toward increasing the number and diversity of applicants, this revised focus of the audit narrowed in on identifying the results of those recruitment outreach efforts based on the number and the actual diversity of applicants. So one of the things I ended up discovering early on into the audit was that a lot of the changes that probably would have been recommended by me were already being implemented by the HR director. So what was the point in going over processes that were probably going to be fixed? Let's more focus on the outcomes and direct ourselves as an organization with here's where we have been, so let's focus on where we want to get to. So the purpose was directed to discover Lane County's government workforce shortfall risk, identify who has been recruited and retained both overall and through the lens of diversity over the past 7 fiscal years to mitigate that shortfall risk, and learn what practices the county could engage in to better recruit and retain workers. So in setting the conditions, it's important to explore who has been in the organization that could leave based on retirement parameters. Remember I said earlier the former auditor just did a quick risk assessment of who could retire based on age. So I wanted to actually do that according to Lane County's workforce. So the best way to do that was not just focus on age alone, but also focus on the system that the Lane County employees are currently participating in, which would be PERS, the Public Employee Retirement System for Oregon. So that includes age, but it also throws in the date of hire. It also throws in your job class. It throws in your years of service, which would help to pinpoint specifically under the PERS umbrella when an employee could leave the actual county based on retirement. So this, there we go. So this visual, which is on page 6 of the audit report and also provided as a handout, includes the minimum PERS retirement criteria, and it's based on 3 factors. The PERS plan, Tier 1, which has Tier 1 or T1, Tier 2 or T2, and the Oregon Public Service Retirement Program, or OPSRP. It's also based on job class, which could be general service or police and fire, and it's based on the retirement options being early retirement or full retirement. So based on all this criteria that you see up above, we based at the time, 1,330 county employees who were employed back in May of 2018, we based those parameters with the then current county workforce to develop potentially what the workforce shortfall risk could be. And so here we have a distribution of the county employees based on their job class and tier level. The visual and the ones on the next 2 slides can also be found on page 7 of the audit report for those who are listening in live. Collectively, OPSRP makes up the majority of the workforce with nearly 880 employees, and Tier 1 and Tier 2 make up the minority, which will come into play a little bit later. So when we look at the distribution of the county employees' ages and years of service, we see the graph on the right also indicates the number of employees who are vested in the PERS system, that being 5 or more years of service with a PERS employer. Important to note, because I'm skipping ahead, but one of the things I noticed whenever I was doing the survey and running a lot of data with the interviews, vested matters because in many cases I was coming across employees who mentioned that they were staying with the county or staying in the system because they were just waiting to be vested, and after that they would potentially consider leaving. So you have the early retirement factor, you have the PERS factor, and then you also have the age factor. Just a quick note, 525 of the 1,330 at the time were 50 or over, and then 833 of that same number were also vested. So what does it all translate into? Well, here you have the distribution of the employees who are able to retire, either with early or full. Quick notes from what you see here. You can make that out. 355 of the 355 who are eligible to retire in less than 1 year under the early calculation, 317 are eligible now or at the time. And of the 190 who are eligible to retire in less than a year under the full retirement calculation, 147 are or were eligible to retire at that time, to help set the conditions for the actual audit moving ahead, which highlights the need to not only anticipate who could be leaving, but also when that leaving might occur. You know, I suggest in the actual audit that Tier 1 and Tier 2 employees are more than likely to stay because they are so close to their retirement. The benefits are so good that to leave at this point, only having 2, 3, 4, 5 years to go, at this point it wouldn't make much sense unless they found another person employer. OPSRP, however, has less incentive because retirement benefits are not as lucrative. So with that being said, and if they make up, again, as I told you, remember that in the previous slide, if they make up the majority of your workforce and they have less incentive to stay, it's important to know when they could be leaving. So, because over 25% are able to retire within 1 year, based on those numbers. So my suggestion, which is going to lead us to the next audit, would just be to have policies in place that allow for succession planning, cross-training, development of informational materials like manuals, and help to minimize short-staffed divisions, which leads us to the next slide.
Can I ask a question about data? Just, is that okay?
Yeah.
So when you say they have less reason to stay, is that simply on the basis of what their benefits look like and the time with which they're accruing, but nothing in terms of the outside? That's the reason you're making that statement?
Yeah, see, that's based on,
Thank you.
So I'll jump to
No, thanks, I apologize.
Yeah, you're okay. So when you start in the process, so fast forwarding ahead, I ended up meeting with about 293. I'm not going to cut too much because it was a Kaylee slide, but I met with several employees who were Tier 1 and Tier 2, and many of them mentioned, I'm too close to retiring. I don't want to have to leave and switch an employer. And then not to mention, I've met with several staff, including a lot of the people who help to process payroll, such as Sally Pelkey and Cindy Cutler, and meeting with them and talking with them about what are you seeing as far as the patterns. So yeah, just the lucrative benefits.
Thank you.
So with OPSRP personnel being the majority and them, you know, very easily being able to leave because there's less incentive to stay, because the retirement, there's no guarantee that they're going to stay 20 to 30 years. I bring up one of the first 4 proposals, which is to put policies in place that incentivize workers to disclose when they might be leaving. So one of the things that was discovered during that interview process and those focus groups was that there were a couple policies in place that kind of deterred them from wanting to actually tell the county in advance of when they might be leaving, even though they knew full well. So what you were typically getting was a lot of 2 weeks notice, the standard 2 weeks versus if they knew a month or 2 out, they just wouldn't tell them. Part of that was coming back to a couple policies that kept resurfacing during the interviews and the focus groups, which was in Lane County's Administrative Procedures Manual, Chapter 3, Section 34, Issue 7, Subpart 4C and F. So basically, the county has, to just generally put it, the county has TM, time management, which to people on the outside of the organization who don't know, I didn't even know what TM was till I got here. But it's essentially vacation or sick leave. And basically what it holds is that once you tell your supervisor that you're going to be leaving, the current policy as it's currently constructed says that you are no longer allowed to use your vacation time. And then the other part of the subpart of that policy states that, so the county also has an ability to sell your TM up to 80 hours a year or 200 hours once you get within 3 years of being PERS eligible for retirement. So you can actually sell that vacation time on your base hourly rate. So it also says that, so if you make $20 an hour, you can sell that for 20 times 80 per year, whatever. So the other policy basically states that so you can no longer use your vacation leave. And then by the time you leave, that TM value is cut in half to 50%. So if you make $20 an hour and you got, it's suddenly, by the time you leave, you'll get a check for, $10 based on however many other vacation hours you have left. So essentially, one of the things that they were saying was that if I tell my supervisor I'm getting ready to leave, and I can't use my vacation time, and then my value gets cut in half, I've got no incentive to tell them. So going back to the actual proposal, the idea is to actually incentivize the employees to let their supervisors know with as much advance notice as possible.
I think you need to, Mr. Chair, you need to really emphasize that last statement that you made regarding perceived penalties based upon TM policies. And you said that if there's $20 an hour, that they get $10, and it's cut in half. More like if they have 20 hours, it's cut to 10 hours.
Yeah.
Same net difference.
Yeah.
But really an important factor that I really pulled out of the last time you presented this to us is that that really is a disincentive for people to let the county know when they're leaving. A serious disincentive. You probably picked that up, but I want to double underline that and put an exclamation point beside it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That policy popped up many times. So I know that, I'm not going to comment on the executive team's response because it's not my place. I will note, however, that they did say that they will be working on that moving forward. So, but it was an issue that kept popping up to just actually address, what can be done to kind of incentivize. So proposal A suggested that you remove existing policies which deter employees from making the government aware of their intents to leave, and that you replace those policies with ones that incentivize workers supervisors as much leave as notice. So if you've got a policy that currently says it's worth 50%, no matter how much notice you give us, then maybe if you give us, instead of the standard 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe you get 60%. More advance notice, 70%. So something that incentivizes as much advance notice as possible. So that's the gist of proposal A. So we've kind of tackled the shortfall risk based on the PERS system, and understand that at the time over 25% could be leaving, and then and then the need to actually be able to anticipate when people will be leaving. So with that being said, let's focus on the recruitment and retention efforts to maintain or improve the government's operations based on the number and diversity of populations applied to, hired into, employed by, and departed from the county's departments and offices. So as we get into that, I wanted to remind you to just remember the definition of diversity, which includes these many aspects as we focus on the 3 most frequently tracked and commonly recognized, being ethnicity, gender, and age. Now, to be fair, these 3 are not enough to comprehensively understand what true diversity is. As you can see, there are many different variables as to what that could mean. There are innumerable variables. So what we're doing, in a sense, is merely just a starting point. That being said, if we do want to have meaningful steps towards bolstering diversity, it is important to know where those numbers are. I remember back in December, I was on the phone with at the time, Chair Bozovich, when he was getting ready to give his State of the County address, and we were talking about what could be said about the actual audit and the actual speech as far as what we're doing to help focus on our workforce. I remember we were talking about it, and we had a pretty in-depth discussion because one of the things we noticed was, it's one thing to say, here are our numbers. It's another thing to delve into those numbers. I use the example of if you say you hired, 30 Native Americans or something like that, but then you discover that none of them are managers or directors or all ground level employees. Well, how diverse is it at that level? Or if you look at the same population and you discover that they're all located in one department, but you've got 9 total, well then how widespread or accessible is it? Or if you have, a hiring of like 10, but you've got a government of 1,400, then how diverse and how widespread is it really. So Commissioner Bozovich and I actually had a lot of in-depth discussions just about understanding not just the numbers, but the placement of those numbers throughout an organization. So that being said, the question I have, or the question to be posed, is what does a diverse workforce in Lane County government look like? I note that in the actual strategic plan, there is an omission that there are currently no standards for knowing whether or not the vision of having a diverse organization is being or has been fulfilled in the institution, which represents a conundrum because what diversity looks like to me may be distinctly different from what diversity looks like to you, because diversity in and of itself is a subjective concept. And if differing views of what diversity is and what diversity looks like can be had for just two people, then how much more so for a county government with over 1,300 employees in a county with easily over 360,000 residents with different backgrounds, upbringings, beliefs, opinions, views, stances, ideologies, biases, and so on, which all inform how we view things like diversity. So naturally, when Lane County says it will seek to be a diverse organization, the next question that should naturally follow is, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by diverse? In what ways? In which areas? How do you know whether or not you're improving in an area when you haven't identified the very areas that need improving? So what benchmarks are to be set in place to monitor the progression you make? I remember now Chair Sorensen and I were having this conversation a couple of weeks ago. What are those benchmarks that are going to be enforced to help to make sure that the vision of having a diverse workforce is not forgotten outside of the month of February? So when we look at Proposal C, we start to delve into this a little bit more. So Proposal C starts to beg the question of beginning with, again, remember diversity is a diverse, well, no pun intended, but it is a diverse definition. My proposal is that because a lot of those terms that you saw in that definition aren't necessarily tracked, I would argue that you begin with the basic three, which the county currently tracks already. Ethnicity, gender, and age, and identify as a collective, one voice, unified organization which populations by their demographics contribute to the county having a diverse workforce, so that everyone has an understanding of the same thing and everyone's on the same page. And I want to emphasize an emphasis on qualified personnel, so that, regardless of their race, the county can continue to operate effectively, efficiently, and economically. So qualified personnel.
You said not just their race, but their classification within this broad definition of diversity.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and just ensuring that they themselves are qualified. So you have the persons, but then you also are ensuring that they are capable of doing the job. And so the next step to that would be to minimally quantify, because you can say, well, we hired one, but is that enough? So the next step to that would be, so first qualify who it is you're referring to, which genders, which ethnicities, which age groups, and then quantify based on a number or a percentage within those different sectors of the organization, how many would be needed to qualify itself as diverse. So one person, 2%, 10%, so let's get some actual specificity around what is it going to take to actually get us here. So it helps to set the goals. So we're not looking at it solely from the perspective of the county as a whole. We're looking at it in terms of each department's, their offices, breaking it down to the divisions, breaking it down to the programs, and within those areas, again, remembering what does it all mean if they're on the ground crew. We want to keep in mind things like the position or the managerial level, and in our case, the job group. Then Chair Sorensen just brought it up. None of us identify as any one thing in particular. No one person is just a gender. They also have an ethnicity. No one person just has a gender and an ethnicity. They also have an age. So it's one of those ideas of looking at this holistically and viewing it from the stance of who we're referring to, what percentages or value amounts, and then which blendings of those persons, or one of the common terms that's often brought up is intersectionality. So it's that idea of based on an annual average in terms of each position, each managerial level, each job group, gender, age, and ethnicity. So that third point for this bullet would be to incorporate, which was another issue, again, Chair Sorensen and I had an interesting conversation about, would be to incorporate these procedures within the organization to ensure that qualifying and quantifying benchmarks are reached during all 4 phases of employment. The 4 phases being those who apply, those who are hired, those who are employed over time, and those who depart throughout each fiscal year on an annual average. Otherwise, one of the things Chair Sorensen was bringing up was that without administrative enforcement or an expectation that you were going to at least be striving towards these goals, you can keep kicking the can down the road and say, well, we're working on it, we're working on it. So it's actually what policies can be set in place to help ensure that these things are continued on an ongoing effort.
May I hear, Casey?
No?
Thank you. So I find it fascinating that everything that you've articulated is actually, for the last 30 years, been articulated in the building trades and has been by this board specifically as it relates to this courthouse ballot measure. And so the coincidence of everything thus far that you've mentioned as it relates to diversity and making it real, if I may.
Yeah.
And the notion of focused recruitment for jobs in building the courthouse, particularly with populations who've been excluded from full workforce participation in the past. In the building trades, what they talk about is women, minorities, veterans, and young people embarking on work. And there are literally state and national organizations that assist people. None of these would be Lane County jobs as county government. But if this in fact passes, I think you will have tremendous resource to assist, implement, to the degree the board agrees with all of this, exactly what you're talking about internally from folks that have been doing it for decades externally. I'm sorry, it's just powerful, the coincidence of the terms you're using and how that works, including community higher thresholds, levels from ownership, down to apprentices, to journeymen, to supervisors, journeymen, apprentices, exactly what you've been discussing. I'm sorry, I just wanted to, it's remarkable to me.
Yeah, I mean, they're none of these, again, appealing to the business side of each of us. None of these concepts should theoretically be new to any of us. It's just that idea.
One would hope not.
Yeah, it's that idea of, you say you want to be diverse, well, what are we talking about?
Yeah,
and how many is going to take to actually amount to diversity versus we've got one at 15 to 1400. Well, there's that.
We're there.
Yeah, so, congratulations.
Yeah.
So, then the next step or the final piece would be to publicize the results of those recruitment and retention efforts for the sake of accountability and transparency. Now, this publication can be accomplished in a number of ways, as is evident in the 390 plus pages, or the 390 pages of this over 500 page report. In terms of length, the goal of, as a matter of fact, speaking of length, it was often brought up to my attention like the actual length of the report. I will say that the goal of this was to actually provide a hopefully substantive tool that each department could use, because what ends up happening is, yes, it's 500 plus pages, but in reality, a lot of those are divvied up by the department. It's probably a total of about 40 to 50 pages when you just look at the county level. If you're in the DA's office and you're looking at technology services or you're looking at public works, then it starts to balloon. So the goal of this was to give each department a slice of what their department was saying as far as recruitment and retention.
In the 3 categories of the multiple definition of diversity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's that idea of here's where you are, here's your history, what do you want to do with it, and how can you progress organizationally moving forward. So that was the idea of this. But yeah, there you go. So one of the more user-friendly and advanced and convenient, however, is a method Kaylee, myself, human resources, technology services employed, which was the use of dashboards. So what we ended up doing was examining the county's employee populations based on ethnicity, gender, and age group demographics within each department and office and each job group across those who applied to, were hired into, employed by, and departed from the county over time. So at this point, the first dashboard has been posted for quite some time. The latest one, which the directors of each department have had an opportunity to see, was posted just this morning at 8 o'clock, so this is live and it just went public. So for those who are streaming online or watching, you go to the main county website, head to the County Performance Auditor webpage, and then you'll click either of those two links. There are two different dashboards. Kaylee's going to guide us through the first one. I want her to have an opportunity to take over, and I will let her steer, but this highlights the idea of how you can publicize this moving forward.
So hello again, everyone, and thank you, Casey. Before we dive into these dashboards, which have a lot of data, there are a couple of things to note just to get you oriented to what this looks like. Firstly, as you see on this first dashboard, which shows job openings, our demonstration today on the first of dashboards is only going to be countywide. So we're just going to look at the countywide numbers. If you're interested in examining data from specific departments, you can use the drop-down menu in the top right corner.
Well, hold on, let me pause here.
Yeah.
Because there's normally, and Mike, maybe you can help me out. If you can, I don't know. You put you on the spot. But usually at the bottom here, there's a full screen. Oh wait, it's hidden. So there's an option to go full screen here. Okay, there we go. Never mind. Thank you.
Yay. Okay, so now you can see the drop-down menu a little bit better. You can see each of the departments up there. So if you wanted to see what each department showed, you could click on one of those and it will repopulate the numbers.
But you're gonna click on all.
Well, you know, what ended up happening with that last audit committee meeting was we went through all of them, and again, I thought people were starting to nod off. So I'll let Kaylee go through the instructions, and then what we'll end up doing is giving the commissioners an opportunity to, if y'all are curious about anyone in particular, as we go through it, then we'll take 2-3 minutes to go through and let y'all have a
Well, we have at least two department directors here, so what about HR and IT?
And Public Works.
Oh, Public Works.
That's what happens when you show up.
How about two of the three then?
Yeah, okay, Kaylee, go ahead and.
Yeah. So the second thing to note here is that the data are split up into fiscal years, which for Lane County runs from July of one year to June of the following year. You can see that on the left-ish side down there. Applicant data only goes back 4 full fiscal years because the county switched to NeoGov, which allows for tracking of applicant information such as demographics. So it only goes back to 2015. The other areas being hires, employed averages, and departures goes back to 2012, so 7 fiscal years. Thirdly, at the top of each dashboard, you'll notice the fiscal year totals. Below are the breakdowns by category. In this case, we have just by job group. This format is going to be consistent amongst job openings, applicants, hires, employed averages, and departures, so you can orient that way.
And for the 3 trackable numbers.
So you'll see
for
the
age,
trackable-
race, and sex.
Correctly. You can see those in the main menu all the way to the left.
The one exception, I know Kaylee's gonna hit this, the one exception being age for applicants, and I know Alana can speak to this, which would just be that it's not legally trackable, where the county doesn't legally track age for applicants. Go ahead.
So we use NeoGov for our applicant tracking system, and there are certain demographics that we have there. I was just checking in with Laura. Once we hire folks, we can talk about those that come into our organization because part of the information we collect will include age, and so we can grab that in PeopleSoft. But it hasn't been something under NeoGov, and we try to be very careful what we're tracking.
Yeah.
You know, because we want people different. Like we're not looking at you know, different things when they're first coming in just to be interviewed. But certainly as this presentation and our work goes on, we'll be looking at, some opportunities or possibilities of how to track and maybe get some information, talk to different folks about what that might look like and feel like, and maybe go back and expand some of our verbiage in NeoGov so that, we're gonna be exploring possibilities.
Awesome. So yeah, the next thing to notice is the job groups, and there are 9 in the county based on the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission categories. And those include administrative support, officials and managers, professionals, protective services, non-sworn, sworn, and sworn officials, service maintenance, skilled craft, and technicians. You'll see that throughout as well. The job groups that specific positions fall into can be found in Appendix H, which you have as a handout, and can be found on page 530 in the audit report itself. So we've kind of looked at job openings. Shall we move on to applicants?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So yes, applicants only shows data for ethnicity and gender at the moment. On this dashboard, we examined those who applied to county positions and then were advanced through the applicant process. Advanced here means that the applicant met the minimum qualifications for that position, and so they were advanced through the process. This portion of the dashboard shows applicants by ethnicity. The demographic categories that are shown throughout here adhere as closely as possible to the U.S. Census Bureau's data as possible, although the county does get a little bit more granular when it comes to age group and gender. So here we have ethnicities, which include American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, multi-ethnic, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, not specified or left blank, and white. And then we can also look at applicants by gender. Genders that the county tracks include female, male, non-conforming, not specified or left blank, other identity, transgender female, and transgender male. It should be noted, however, that the county didn't start tracking genders outside of the male-female binary until the calendar year 2017, so that data is a little watchy. All right, so now that we've looked at both job openings and applicants, let's take a look at hires. And we'll start off with hires by ethnicity. And beginning with hires, we have data on ethnicity, gender, and age group, and a new one called hire type. Let's do a quick run through of each of these.
Those are same categories.
Same fiscal years, same locations and everything. The age groups here are separated into 5-year increments, beginning with the age group 15 through 19 and going all the way through to the age group 70 through 74.
When life is terminal.
And lastly, we have hires by hire type. Among the 4 major categories of hire type are hire through recruitment, promotion, rehire, and transfer via internal recruitment. So you can see hires by all those different types.
And these are all now publicly available on the website for anyone who wants to peruse.
Oops. All right, let's take a look at employed averages, for which we have data on ethnicity, gender, and age group. We can start out with employed averages by ethnicity. And it should be noted that the average employed numbers were calculated using a very, very fun mathematical calculation. So first, you'll take the number of employees in each department or office, listed under each demographic group being ethnicity, gender, and age, and each job group, so administrative support, officials, managers, etc., on each day of the fiscal year. That was step 1. Step 2, you sum each of those numbers. In step 3, you divide those numbers by the number of days in that fiscal year. And then finally, you round each individual quotient to the nearest integer or whole number. So fun. So we can also take a look at employed averages by gender, which again use those same categories that we've seen before.
Is this countywide data?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, again, you can check out the departments up in that top right corner drop-down menu.
Yeah, so we'll get to a point to where
To where what?
to where once we're done with the instructions, if y'all are curious about one or two before we move on to the next dashboard, you can have a quick peek.
And we've got about 15 minutes on your 1 hour right at this point.
Okay.
50 minutes to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we take a quick look at departures, starting with ethnicity. So for departures, we have data on ethnicity, gender, age group, years of service, and reason for departing. See those same categories, same layouts. Now, for years of service, those are split into varying intervals in order to point out the difference in turnover, first between individuals who are vested in the PERS system, so those who have worked for a PERS employer for 5 or more years versus those who are not, as well as the difference between short-term and long-term employees. These intervals include less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 4 years, and all those groups would be individuals that, for the most part, would not be vested in PERS. Then we go to 5 to 9 years, 10 to 14 years, 15 to 19, 20 to 24, onward up through 40 or more years. Finally, let's take a look at departures by reason for departing. Reasons for departing were grouped by human resources into the following categories, which include layoff, other position, other reasons, probation, relocation, resignation, retirement, and return to school. If you'd like more specificity regarding which reasons fell into these groupings, you can refer to the reported reasons for leaving document that is both here as a handout and found on page 221 of the audit report.
So that's it. That's it for this dashboard. So unless y'all had questions, we're gonna move on to the next one. If y'all wanted to see anything.
Well, could you put up like a big department, like Public Works, just to give us a,
Which category would you be? Who's been applying?
why don't you try, the categories are gender, ethnicity, and age?
You want applicants, hires, or employed departures?
How about hires for via ethnicity in Public Works?
Hires, ethnicity. Works.
So there you can see your totals. For the
So
business.
104,
We're hired in 18.
okay.
So if you scroll down, you can see.
And 64, is that what I'm reading? It's hard for me to see that, but it's 64?
84 were
80%.
84. Is that 84% or is that 84?
People.
84 people out of a total of,
104.
okay. And so that will give us the 2018 number
Yeah.
for Public Works.
Yes.
Now, the other years, at the bottom where it says white, what do those bars mean?
So 35 were hired in 2012.
Out of
30.
39.
Yeah, 35 out of 39, and then so on so forth.
So there's no way to see a percentage number.
That'll be in the next set of dashboards.
And by the way, I think this is phenomenal that
Yeah.
you've got all this up on a public website so
Yeah.
that people can look at this information.
Major, major, major props to the Human Resources Department and Technology Services. A lot of time went into that from, Director Holmes, Director Finch, Crystal, Deanna Smith, who spoke about the dashboards a couple weeks ago, Lauren Black, a lot of people. Again, just see the acknowledgments page. A lot of people went into that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you will get the percentages, but that's the next dashboard.
Okay.
So any more curiosities, or are we ready to keep it rolling?
It's really keep it rolling.
Okay.
For 11 more minutes, approximately.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my time got kind of eaten into a little bit there.
It did, I'm sorry.
It's okay, as long as I, get a couple minutes back.
You get us back during the answers to the questions.
Okay. So, I'm really quick, so I'll let Kaylee take over. Here, you will see the, did I say Deanna Smith for Technology Services? Okay,
Yep.
good, making sure. So here, I'm pretty straightforward. Here you will see the second batch of dashboards. What we wanted to do is dig a little bit deeper into the context of the county government in comparison to the relative populations that are relevant to them. So what you'll also see, but before we get to that, you'll have fiscal year range, job group, ethnicity, and gender stipulations. All those things Kaylee mentioned earlier carry over to this one, so nothing's changed. The only thing that's different is that the age groups, which were segmented off of 5-minute increments, when grouped into the census data, that way it parallels with the age groups, were accordingly. And then there are 2 additional drop downs. So you have the departments, but you also have the job groups, service maintenance, professionals, administrative support, blah, 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 blah. And then you also have the census location being Lane County, the United States of America, or the state of Oregon. So if you're curious about a specific population relative to a job group within an actual department, paralleled with the actual county or the actual census location, you're more than free to.
Did you use a global number like from some international organization like the UN or International Food Agency or some international data on ethnicity, gender, and age?
So that came from the Census Bureau.
So you went from Lane County, Oregon, and US, but not to global?
No. Just the U.S. and then it's an interesting point, but no, just the U.S., state of Oregon, and Lane County, using the American Citizen Survey and the U.S. Census Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be your parallel. So applicants and census for fiscal years to parallel with the NeoGov data. So the people who applied, the people who advanced relative to the people in that local area, depending on which one you wanted to do. The employed averages calculation stays the same for employed averages and census.
Yeah, and I noticed that, Casey, you're giving 2014 census data because that 2015 data is actually fiscal year 2015, which is 14-15.
There you go.
Crossover, so you kind of got to look at the 14-15 census data and average it.
There you go.
To compare to our fiscal year.
That's the closest context we could get because county, we obviously, the operating year goes off of fiscal year, census goes off of calendar year, so keep that in mind, but that gives you, and then 2018 at the time wasn't available whenever we were doing this, so 17 is as most recent as we can get. So, anyone curious about anything in particular?
So it's ethnicity, gender, and age by geographic area, Lane County, Oregon, US.
Right, so you could, Kelly, go ahead and click like state of Oregon. So this is every job group in the county relative to the state of Oregon, and then do the US. Relative to the US, and then back to Lane County. So you can actually see for every job group versus a specific job group, how the county is doing.
Mm-hmm.
How's the county doing?
I mean, it's a broad question. This is it. If you want to look at how we're doing with relative populations, you can kind of scroll down just a tad. You can see the legend at the bottom there. So there's the Asian population, Black, African American, Hispanic, multi-ethnic, Native Hawaiian. They didn't specify white, then American Indian. So that goes back to that whole proposal of what does the county mean when it says that, what do you want to do? Right. So keep these things in mind, keep that proposal in mind. So how are we doing? How do you want to do? And then how are we going to determine that as an organization? So if there are any curiosities, you've got applicants, hires, employed averages, and departures relative to the populations, if anyone's curious, before we keep it moving.
Let's show the difference between these,
We
because
have
now different bar charts.
Bar charts instead of pie charts.
Yeah, we jumped to, yeah, just to, because when you had 7 pie charts on the thing, it was too small, I couldn't make it. It was kind of a beast. Then we get to the departures. So there you go.
Any slicing and dicing?
We all good?
I'm gonna save my questions till after you're
Okay.
done. I wanna.
So that being said, we gotta keep it moving since I'm on the clock. So one of the things you noticed you had the turnover percentages. You had the turnover percentages, and one of the things that popped up was, in those turnover percentages, you weren't necessarily clear on who is in those percentages that are leaving. How do you know that if you have a turnover percent of like 12 or 13%, that the people who are not necessarily beneficial to the organization are staying, then the people who are detrimental, who aren't detrimental to the organization are the ones leaving. So it's that idea of, what does our turnover look like? So in looking at that, I arrived at proposal B. It was mentioned earlier with the other presenters, the idea of return on investment or cost benefit. I proposed something similar called positional turnover thresholds, which use cost value formulas, and which are not that dissimilar from a cost benefit. While they can be intricate, the basic idea is that the cost of an individual employee to an organization are calculated and weighed with the values brought by that same individual. The weighing is then managed by proportional variables, whether the performance measures, how much of this value are we getting on a regular basis based on the employee's actions, key performance indicators, performance evaluations, are they a team member? The county just started the 360 the employee evaluation.
E-performance.
The e-performance. So how can that be weighted into? How can those scores be weighted into the amount of value that an employee brings to the organization? And so what you essentially end up doing is when you weigh those things and you give them assigned scores and values, you essentially come up with a range of acceptability of we need to be getting at least this much value, or excuse me, we hope to be getting at least this much value per the employee based on how much they are costing the actual organization, so that you get a range of acceptability which is not that dissimilar from a return on investment. Based on that, you'll be able to determine where are detrimental areas that need to be focused on and where are beneficial areas that we can start to emulate those processes in different divisions or departments or offices. I outlined the cost per staff member. They could be, or they would be, recruitment outlays, onboarding costs, salaries, benefits, equipment, taxes, physical workplace, how much is the lease if they're leasing out a building, electric bills, things like that. It can be a mammoth task, which is why one of the things I believe that would be pretty useful would be to initiate like another capstone project. I'm of the belief that that would make a really good capstone project with like the 3 p.m. students such as Kaylee here, where they could go into an organization and as long as they are overseen by the proper county personnel, they can go into each department or each division or each program and just calculate about how much does this cost. So that would save a lot of time and go through a lot of different people. The values, on the other hand, is to make sure that the county's not valuing itself where you could have a conflict of interest, would then need to be done by an outside entity so that there is no conflict. That could come through a valuation firm or consulting agency that could give you the value that a position brings to an organization to make for that calculation.
So you're saying an outside agency could be more subjective in assigning values than we would be able to do it internally?
Less objective.
Objective.
Yeah, more objective.
Right.
Yeah, so just
Less subjective.
right. Yeah, because we're in here, then we're obviously gonna potentially trump up the value more than it would be. But if you go through someone else, then you are reasonably more assured that there's less conflict than there would be otherwise if I'm valuing myself or someone who's close to me in a different department, but I like them. So just that balance in that calculation, that helps you to gauge retention.
So loving the ducks doesn't that go to it then? Right, okay.
No, you're killing me. ducks. So that helps to help gauge retention. The last part of this presentation, as we go into it, is that it's not enough to be able to gauge retention. You also want to be able to manage it as well. And one of the ways that you manage it is to be informed as to what is needed, specifically in this area for recruitment and retention. So to that end, we sought to fulfill the last purpose of this audit, which was to learn the practices the county could engage in to better recruit and retain workers, be it to create, by way of creating and conducting a primary stakeholder survey. So I will let Kaylee take it from there.
All right, hello again, and thank you, Casey, again. So this survey was created using multiple stages. Firstly, this man heroically conducted interviews with 293 county employees, asking 3 open-ended questions, which you can see up here, which include: what made you want to work for Lane County government? For what reasons have you continued with Lane County government? And what might Lane County government do or offer to further retain your services? These interviews occurred in person, telephonically. 223 respondents were individual sessions, and 70 were in focus groups of 10 people. Interviews were limited to each question, or for each question, to 5 responses. There was no ranking system adhered to. Responses to those questions were summarized by Casey as needed, and Casey then checked in with each respondent to make sure that those summaries were accurate so that we could ensure accuracy. And to gain a more robust understanding of what these respondents were saying, Casey sought out any documentation of policies or procedures to which interviewees referred and or which might illuminate areas for improvement in recruitment and retention practices. After 20% of the county had been interviewed, Casey and I coded the interview responses for trends, patterns, repeating themes to create between 10 and 12 answer choices for each question, which you'll see on the following slides. These answer choices were used in what would become the county-wide primary stakeholder survey, which was released on August 9th and was available for 2 weeks. We utilized the survey website Qualtrics, you can see a picture, a screenshot there, to collect the majority of responses, but for those for whom computers are not regularly provided, we also provided paper documents. Countywide, 937 of the existing 1,466 regular status employees participated, with a participation rate of 64%. On this next slide, you can see the answer choices from which respondents to the countywide primary stakeholder survey could choose for question 1. I won't read them all out to you, but you can see all of the questions, statements, and cited examples in the audit report beginning on page 408 and in a document that Casey showed you.
May I ask a question on that? And I didn't ask this the last time we presented this. Each one of these bullet points does not indicate how many people responded in that category. So can you explain that a little bit? Each bullet point seems to be weighted equally here.
Yeah, so what tends to happen that you tend to see quite often is that people just make a survey. The typical process that I've learned to do in my own doctoral disciplines and with meeting with other researchers is that first you build the survey off of interviews, focus groups, responses, and you member check, which is basically once you get an answer, you give it back to them to help ensure that the feedback that you're getting from them is what they actually mean. And so based on that, then you code it, then you perform these things, and you develop or you come up with the actual examples of what employees were saying. So this section only highlights what the theme that was associated and the literal examples that followed what people meant.
I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
That doesn't quite
Well,
get to my answer.
but let me try, even though I'm not.
I'll try again. What I'm looking
what-
for is an actual survey, it's not some percentages.
We're getting there.
Well, and Casey, what I was going to say, if I may, is this sounds very much like what we heard yesterday. I don't know if you heard.
I heard of it.
Did you? Okay, Dennis Sandoz thing. It sounds because open-ended question, right?
Mm-hmm.
From open-ended question, identifying categories, general categories that most of the answers seem to be, then giving those words back to the people you interviewed to confirm, is this what you said?
Mm-hmm.
and getting to this point. Is that correct? And now I would assume you're about to do what Commissioner Farr requested, right? Yeah, and identify, okay, who fit where.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when you start doing qualitative research, which is very different from just straight up number quantitative statistics, there are 5 primary approaches. You have ethnographies, you have narratives, you have phenomenologies, you have case studies, and in this case, you have grounded theory, which is the process I incorporated to come up with the themes that you see here. And so, yes. So I only saw a little bit of what was said yesterday because I had to present at the county day. But yeah, what bit I saw
was consistent.
Yeah, it's matching closely. Now they were looking at something with more wellness involved, which
Right.
I can't speak to too much because I haven't actually seen their report, so
Right.
I wouldn't want to comment on it. But a lot of what he was saying is in the same vein of what this is.
Thank you.
Okay.
But doesn't that be 16 employees?
That's what I was trying to get.
37 employees.
Yeah, spread out throughout the county. One of the things Kaylee mentioned was, you want heterogeneous sampling without getting too into the weeds, but it's the idea of for what we were trying to do. So one of the comments I heard yesterday was that it was focused on wellness. This one was focused more on recruitment and retention, so they are related. Because when you start talking about wellness, that speaks to the retention piece. You're not going to be able to retain people if they aren't well.
But the qualitative methodology sounds very similar. That was my point.
Yeah. So, there you go. So, grounded theory was the terminology or was the method approach that we used. So, okay, keep going. So, to answer Commissioner Farr's question of the actual number, and then, so before you get there, I sampled people in every single department. Asking these 3 questions, every single department, open-ended, then we did the coding, looking for keywords and patterns, and then that was in every department, and I tried to get them to be as different as possible. I wanted managers, I wanted supervisors, I wanted ground level staff, I wanted people of different ages, I wanted people of different ethnicities, different genders. That way you get as different a possible response as humanly possible. So, that being said, here were the themes that kept popping up within the county. And then Kay, I'll let you. Are we done?
And I'll let you know if you answer my question
Okay.
going forward.
Okay. Are we next?
All right, so here we have the frequencies of responses to survey question 1, which was, as you'll remember, respondents could choose up to 5 responses. So if you were to add up all these percentages, it wouldn't come out to a 100% because they could come out to 500%. The most frequently chosen responses you can see at the top were geared toward the following in descending order of frequency, starting with potential benefits at 73%, position fit at 63%, job stability security at 58%, and so on.
So, what made you want to work for Lane County? Here's what the numbers or the portions or the percentages of people were saying.
Yeah.
And this is broken down again in each department, so you can see the specific results in those areas.
Yeah, so this is just countywide.
Right.
So we also took a look at the relationships among answers to each question, and this is a crosstab. So on the top you'll see responses, and on the side you'll see responses. The red on the top are, again, those 5 most frequently answered responses, and below you can see the frequencies with which other responses accompanied those responses. So for example, of the 685 people who selected potential benefits, 62% also selected position fit. Of the 542 people who selected job stability or security, 83% also selected potential benefits. You can do that with each and every one of these cells.
So that helps to identify because they could pick up the 5. So what are people picking that shows here are our key areas to focus on?
So here we can see the answer choices from which respondents could choose for question 2. For what reason or reasons have you continued with Lane County government? Again, questions, statements, and cited examples can be found both in a handout that you have and in the audit report beginning on page 409. And for each of these questions, we included an other category, so people who didn't feel that their response was included could choose that one. Here again are the frequencies with which respondents chose each answer choice. The most frequently chosen responses are again at the top 3 being in descending order: benefits at 63%, enjoying the work at 56%, and job stability or security at 49%.
Thank you, Kaylee.
Yes.
A little more patience on my part. Or wait to hear Kaylee say it.
Yeah. When in doubt, go to Kaylee. Trust me.
Gosh, please don't. Here again, you can see the relationships among answer choices. And below, again, are the frequencies with which responses accompany the top responses. So again, as an example of the 593 people who chose benefits to this question, 56% selected enjoy the work. And of the 323 people who selected compensation, 77% also selected benefits. So you can see how these things come together. Finally, question 3, you can see the answer choices here. Again, you have a handout with all of the questions, statements, and cited examples, and you can find them again in the audit report beginning on page 410. Lastly, the frequencies of answer choices for question 3. The top 3 here were compensation improvement at 65%, more focus on benefits at 49%, and better work-life balance at 37%. So it's a little bit more dispersed answers in this question. And the crosstabs for question 3. Last examples of the 455 who selected more focus on benefits, 80% also selected compensation improvement, so those were highly correlated. And of the 350 people who selected better work-life balance, 58% also selected more focus on benefits, so slightly correlated.
So, just an observation. It's interesting, as you look at these 3 different categories, why, what made you apply, why are you still here, and what would help you stay. The position fit, being number 2, and then enjoying the work as why you're still here kind of matches up. If you're doing, the position fit what you wanted, you tend to enjoy the work. But what's interesting though is how low more staff support and acknowledgement of work came in the final question. Because that's, you constantly are told, that is so important to employee engagement and recruitment and retention is people feeling acknowledged and supported in their work. And yet that was not what the respondents came back with on a high value.
Not additional.
Yeah, not additional. I guess maybe they're feeling, so maybe that's, so it's kind of that enjoying the work, maybe they are getting that support and acknowledgement. Of course, this is a all employee, we didn't get down to, because what was interesting was the report we got yesterday from Dennis Sandow was specific to 16 employees in the health clinic. And that was kind of the takeaway was we weren't doing enough acknowledgement and supporting of that staff. And that in his open-ended question was the broad takeaway from that.
Commissioner Bernie?
Breathe through?
Yeah.
Have you broken this down by age? And let me ask you before you jump to it, the reason I ask. First of all, you guys, this is so phenomenally thought through. It's staggering to me.
Almost too much to think.
Yeah. Because I would assume, but tell me if I'm wrong, I would assume that like this acknowledgement of position and work, I would assume that by different age group, like millennials, that I'm told by my child that, that's more important to them, or certain things are more important to them, whereas in my generation, it might be hours, pay, benefits, boom. So will that affect these numbers at all if you segregate by age, do you think? Or have you already done that?
No, that was one of the, when you start asking the question of what's the county need to do to keep you, you start getting into some really sensitive waters there. So one of the things I had to do was assure the people I met with that their stuff would be confidential. So the recording of ages,
Right.
all that kind of stuff,
Right.
I couldn't do it.
So it might change by
Well,
age,
you-
it might not, but you don't know.
Yeah, no, just so that we can maintain some confidentiality. I'm sure Alana could speak to like what she tends to see in the HR world as far as what people are saying generationally.
Right.
But I didn't, I was like, people already, they're nervous when they see a phone, they think you're recording. You know? So I left it alone. Yeah, but yeah, that would be interesting. The more data you can get, the closer you can hone in on a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
But with something like this, I can only get but so close.
Understood.
Yeah.
And one other data point to talk about, which is not included in this presentation, but is resplendent throughout this audit report, is you can get a more 3D view of these responses by looking at the cross tabulations of answers to question 1 to answers to question 2, 1 to 3, 2 to 3. So you can see the patterns of responses that accompanied one another in each of the different areas of what drew you here, what kept you here, and what could keep you here longer. So if you're interested in that 3D view, that's also here.
So basically, if people said, what brought you to the county, they said benefits in question 1, you can see how many of that same number of people said, what keeps you here, how many of them said benefits in question 2, and then how many of them in question 3, what could the county do to help keep you, how many of them said something related to benefits. So you can see the
3D.
pattern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So you
that's
can-
what I'm calling it. I'm not sure that we can.
Yeah. So there you go.
It's another way of slicing the data.
Exactly.
Yes.
I love crosstabs and surveys.
Oh, gosh. They were fun.
I'm glad you two have something in common. I myself,
Well, now that we've taken a look at all of this data, we have to wonder what becomes of all of this. What do we do with all the data? That brings us to the final audit proposal, proposal D. So one shortcoming that we recognize about this survey is that the results are focused on the entire county and refined only to the department level. Each department, however, can have multiple divisions with staff members having completely different responsibilities. And as a result, what can be considered recruitment and retention offerings in one area are going to be different depending on the division you're looking at. So, for example, a sheriff's officer, or a sheriff's deputy, would most likely not be able to take advantage of working remotely from home, as their job requires them to patrol a specific area. So Proposal D advises using the results of survey question 3 to create a further refined survey to be given to each division to find out what specifically can be done in each department for recruitment and retention purposes.
What's question 3?
Can you do?
What might Lane County government do
further
to offer?
To further retain your services.
Correct. And Casey was showing you Appendix I, which is also a handout that y'all have. And is on page 534 of the audit report. And that is just an example of what divisions and departments could use to give to their employees. Is that right?
Yeah, so that idea of, because it's at the department level, can't apply to everyone, so let's break it down to the division level and just take question 3 and break it down even further to where they can select 1 or 2 and hone in on, well, here's what X employees in this division specifically are saying. And then how can that then be worked around or worked with, put that one. Then the last piece of the proposal focuses again on questions 1 and 2, which basically says the personnel at all employee levels can partner with human resources and each other and make use of their knowledge and expertise in the field or industry that they are in, incorporating the results from the primary stakeholder survey into newly developed work plans, which can or ought to be directed to improve recruitment and retention within their industry and specialized fields. The idea is that, someone in a IT field might be recruited and retained by different means than someone in a law enforcement field, or someone in a construction field like PW might be, their strategies for recruitment and retention might be distinctly different from someone in a law office like the DA. So what were they saying in questions 1 and 2 that could be developed into a work plan, given to human resources as here are some of the things that we've noticed with our employees that are working specifically for us that human resources can apply as it sees fit, because it's still over recruitment and retention. But that idea of a little bit more employee engagement and dialogue between the different departments and personnel that hone in on what strategies are working in different fields. So just develop a work plan and go back and forth and have human resources, because they're already, I'm sure Alana can speak to it, they're already working on employee engagement efforts and a lot of other things. So how can something like a work plan from the staff in these departments offer something to human resources that they can take into consideration? So it's kind of a twofold, two-part proposal, the last one. So, because I always view, like, in many cases, subject matter experts in those departments are the people doing those jobs. And so they tend to keep their ears to the ground and hear what the competition's doing that would be nice, or what's working, or if a competitor's trying to recruit them, what are one of the things that almost worked on them that the county could be implementing. So that, I'm sure I blew past my hour, but that is, as I say that, the audit report is now available online. The dashboards are now publicly available for anyone's consumption and to actually have more transparency and accountability. So there we go.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is a phenomenal, achievement, and both of you are really deserving of our profound respect and thanks for this, because this is something that's going to go on our website, and people are going to be able to see this, and both internally and externally, and it's really an effort to try to put out some really quality information. And yeah, we know that diversity is a very difficult topic. I was looking over some, quotes about diversity, and I found one that we have become not a melting pot, but a beautiful mosaic, different people, different beliefs, different yearnings, different hopes, and different dreams. I didn't say that, President Carter said that, but
Wasn't that President Trump?
no, it was President Carter. And so I think that trying to get to, diversity and trying to recognize the significance to our workforce is a feature of what you've done here. But another feature is to set the groundwork for what are we going to do. And the what are we going to do requires us to commit to doing things. And I think your proposals, creatively numbered A, B, C, D, I think they are all really good. The proposal B, I noticed you wanted to develop a positional threshold. I'm not quite sure what that is, maybe due to my own lack of diversity, being both Viking and from Coos County, that aren't in the mix of geographic and other terminology. But I think that the idea of picking three, picking age, picking a race, picking, what was the third one? Ethnicity, that picking these three are understood, they're tracked, we've got some data, it's a start. And then in terms of the global economy we live in, the fact that the shoes are designed in Oregon, or the bulk handling systems are designed and built in Eugene, Oregon, and sold worldwide. The fact that we're in a world economy, it did concern me that, and it's, again, back to basics, where can you get this data? But we are in a global economy. We are a part of the global community, economically and otherwise. So to not use global data as a starting point, and again, it's not a criticism, it's just a reality, we don't have that. But we are definitely funded by federal taxpayers. We are definitely serving under the laws of the United States of America. We're part of the USA. We have people from all over the United States working for us. And my view would be we should be aspirationally looking at those national data points to say, well, where are we in terms of hiring a diverse, qualified workforce? So anyway, I'm sure we'll have plenty of comments, and incidentally, if I have to go out the door due to another time commitment, our distinguished vice chair can run the meeting. Any other comments or questions? Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll just say a few things. This is the first audit as a new commissioner for me, so the bar has been set. Very, very high. You're gonna hear this probably from everybody, but, all your hard work is definitely commendable, and I think it would be a complete failure of us not to follow through on the proposals presented. This is a year's work
Yeah,
under your
roughly.
belt of this particular report, and it is completely transparent to the public, everything that you've been doing and all the results. I think that's, that was more than I expected from this particular audit, and I thank you for that. I want to be able to see us go further than just having you spend a year on a report and then sit there and we not do anything about it. We have to be able to follow through with some of these proposals, if not all of them. And being able to do that in a financially sound way at the same time, because clearly this work that you've proposed will take time to do, and there's a cost to that. And that's, our work with the administrators, see how we can follow through with these things. And making sure that we're keeping up with our peers in other communities as to how we're implementing the actual standards that we want to set in order to reach the thresholds and bars that you said we really need to have, and I agree wholeheartedly with that. It's good to have our strategies and what we aspire to, but without any kind of benchmark, it's really, there's no power to the punch, and that's what we need to do. So I just wanted to say that. I may come up with another question here after I hear fellow commissioners.
Okay. Who
I don't-
else wants to say something?
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
500
it is.
pages.
Yeah, Commissioner Farr, then Commissioner Burney.
Just a little history on this. When we first discussed this with Casey, greater than a year ago now, the survey, the audit was not this large. We had the initial discussion was really more of a how are we doing now versus how are we doing then regarding recruiting and retention, particularly as it pertained to diversity of staff. As Casey began to look at it, he recommended a broader reach of the audit, such as the one that you've seen in front of you. I don't think anybody fully envisioned the amount of data that they came back from this, but I don't know that we all fully understand how much work is going to go into utilizing this data. Because when you have this much data, it's easy to go down the wrong path if you're not careful to make something that is organized in a fashion that creates the most important way to spend our resources at the time, which is the time that we have to work on it. And Heather, I think you did a very good job of talking about the benchmarks and how do we benchmark, not just against what is happening globally, but what is happening, how do we benchmark against ourselves and the improvement that we make. So there was a huge resource went into this survey. While Mike is sitting in the room, our IT department, I think you wrote a new book on how to use an IT department while creating the dashboards, et cetera, that we're doing here. And it was a huge investment of time in your department. Am I correct in that? With how huge?
Several hundred hours.
Several hundred hours. Okay. So it would be a shame for us to not utilize this data. It would be a shame to not utilize yours and Lease expertise that went into this. So I'm excited about it. It's great stuff. And as I promised at the start of this meeting, the narrative that Casey provides gives more clarity on the, how many pages, Haley?
560.
560 pages, which are very hard.
Bigger than the
to
Mueller report.
Not redacted.
So,
That's a good one.
so contextually, this is a very large audit. And as your first audit, as Heather said, you've set a bar that maybe we can aspire to, but certainly other audits down the road are not going to be as comprehensive.
No, I need to sleep.
But these volumes are not to be set on the shelf and just get allowed to dust over. This is work ahead of us.
I'd like to see much more comprehensive. You know I'm kidding, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I doubt if that's the bar, I doubt there's any other county that's reaching that bar. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
It's really cool. I've found that in my efforts sometimes to create social change, I have to do more work than typically is done in that job to have a foundation to move from. And I think that's exactly what you've done, and I wouldn't be surprised if that were the intent of what you've done. I actually, ironically, I'm going to take exceptions. I don't agree that we're in this big global economy. I believe that we're in an economy where more and more answers are going to have to be developed locally, and talk about local employment and local businesses and local contractors. And I think that's going to be part and parcel of a new social justice agenda as we move forward in a variety of areas. So I just wanted to, just counterpoint. Not that one of us is right or wrong, because I'm probably wrong. But great work, you guys. This is awesome. It's going to take me time to bone up on this, and I hope you'll give me assistance. And the notion of a 3D view, and I know that's your term, but still, I mean, that we're talking the same language, that is just really, really, really cool. And interestingly, you guys talked about another thing that was mentioned to us yesterday, and it had to do with collecting data in such a way so that the people that are actually delivering services and doing the work can input and make recommendations for improvement. That to me came in loud and clear through your report, and it was part of what we were admonished to do yesterday in another report. I think it is great. It's usable data. Thank you very much.
That's definitely the hope. And, again, a lot of people, a lot of different departments, and Administrator Mucker High School, making sure I had access to all the departments, all the elected officials. Everyone played a key role, specifically those two directors behind you. So big team effort. And so, yay team.
Thanks. So, yeah, it's going to take a while to digest all this in some ways, but I do like that we are looking at, improving retention and our recruitment processes, just because of how much that helps with the performance of the organization and meeting our strategic goals. And we recognize that in our strategic plan, and that people was a part of that strategic plan, and you highlighted that. It's fascinating, just a quick look through some of the data. I'll have to ask myself these questions later, but it seems like, when you compare us against at least Lane County census data, we're a little bit more Caucasian than the background, but we've been steadily decreasing and becoming more diverse by ethnic minorities over time, just as Lane County has too. It just, and it's interesting though, we're doing, pretty well in the Native American population, as far as we actually have a higher percentage of Lane County employees that are Native American than are actually in Lane County. And we actually have more women working here than the split. And what's interesting though is men are actually a minority there. So is that a bad thing? That we have more women working here than our background population. So some of the questions about benchmarking are going to be interesting to think about. What's a goal in some of that, and are we going to compare against Lane County's background, or are we comparing against the state of Oregon? You saw the huge difference between us diversity-wise and across the U.S. because Casey's from another area of the U.S. I came from an area that's much more diverse. So it's kind of like expecting to reach that level of diversity here with the background, population that lives here is probably not attainable. So thinking about those goals is going to be really interesting discussion as we as we move ahead as a board and all that, because that's going to be really interesting. The one place that does stand out to me is we're really not doing well in Hispanic population of employees. That's one place where I can definitively see that we're not reflecting the community in this, as far as the local community goes. And that's maybe, to me, that looks like a place we should be looking at. Why is that, and how can we maybe help with that? That stood out just in my quick scan of the dashboard, when you guys turned it over to us a while back.
Yeah.
Was the one place that seemed to stand out, was we're just not quite doing well with that particular aspect of ethnic diversity.
Yeah, Joe?
Two quickies. One is, back in the late 80s, there was a guy, African-American guy named Chuck Smith, who was the head of the Pacific Bell Foundation, which became Pacific Telesis after the AT&T divestiture. The reason I'm mentioning this is that foundation made a conscious decision to start giving money, not in terms of the demographics of its ratepayers, but in what it saw as the future demographics of its ratepayers. So as Commissioner Bozovich mentioned, where we're doing well and where we're not, perhaps as it reflects current, I think we can also look at projections, not too far into the future, but where things are going, and maybe even get ahead a little bit. That's point one.
That's kind of why the Hispanic bothers me a little bit, because that's definitely the growing demographic.
Well, and interesting, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And interestingly, and I just a comment and a side comment, thank you for the opportunity to do this, Mr. Chair. Just me, on the one hand, I see the utility of that. On the other hand, I always put down other, because I've intentionally not mentioned my heritage to people, but I can tell you that 3 of the boxes that could be checked, I could check. So I always put down other. And so, we just have these competing kinds of, it's an interesting society as we move forward. I just wanted to make that one remark.
I did notice there wasn't a drop-down bar for the commissioners. As represent our community as well, I think that's important, but, and that's interesting that you mentioned that too. What I pose to my fellow commissioners is I would like us to see us take next steps on fulfilling some of these proposals and providing direction on how we can do that would be helpful. Because, we might, of course, take some more time to filter through all the material. But I don't want us to forget about following through.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that this discussion thus far would, imply, and maybe we should just make it more official, that we are planning another work session on this, and this time with the county administrator, and the idea of responding to these 4 proposals so that we can get to a point of, and I was curious, Dr. Crear, what do you think about is your role now that this audit's been sort of put in the hands of the Board of Commissioners and the county government? Is this where, there's a good fences make good neighbors kind of thing, and you're on, okay, you did your audit, you're done, what happens is up to the decision makers?
I mean, when you look at the lane manual, when I look at that lane manual, if it's not audit related, I've got no authority whatsoever, and from my perspective, as far as my role, with how the administrator wants to move forward, all the directors, the officials, it comes down to if they want clarification on a particular proposal that might not have been necessarily that clear, or if they have further questions, or if they just want to spitball, throw stuff at the wall and maybe have an open discussion about a couple of things, I'm more than happy to sit down and do that. But I know as my 5 bosses who are here right now, y'all looking for the next project, so which comes down to that risk assessment. So I avail myself to the county staff to give any kind of insight as far as direction.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I don't want your office or you personally to be a staff person for the Board of Commissioners. I would prefer, in answer to your question of how do we move forward, I prefer to answer that as the Board of Commissioners needs a work session on how to implement or not the proposals that you've made, and to the extent that we need to have data or explain data, then we can ask you to come back and explain that, but really the ball is in our court, to use a sports analogy, and we decide whether or not we're going to move forward or not on this, and getting the responses of the administration and department directors and other elected officials is a part of the process of moving forward, and that's what I would like to do, because I totally agree with Commissioner Buck that this amount of work that's gone into this isn't just, okay, we've now learned a lot, that's great. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to have it move into our strategic plan and have it be an active part of that and move it down the road? And I think really everybody here shares the goal of diversity. We might all have our own definitions of what that is, but certainly this is a way to take these 3 data points that we can get from national, state, and county level data and compare it to our own employment data and really, do something good for the community and make it a more welcoming place to work and have a government that looks like the people it serves.
It's funny, when I look at the diversity piece, I remember in the process of drafting the proposal that focused on diversity, I met with several staff, but I also had several conversations with Mo Young back there, the Equity and Access Coordinator. And one of the things that she kind of helped filter into my own psyche when I was drafting it was when you start talking about who develops a diversity plan or a master plan for diversity, who's going to determine what those benchmarks are? Are you going to be, are you going to have the populations you're seeking to have, are they going to have a voice in the development of that master plan, or will it just be a bunch of, a room full of the same people? So,
Go ahead, say it.
No, I'll leave it at that. But I mean, it's that question of that whole idea of part of diversity is inclusivity, which means bringing in, I know Mo can speak to that, but
And our diversity committee could be a big part of that.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of different ways, and I know the administrator has ideas and staff, they've already been talking about it.
Good.
I
All
agree,
right, well,
I agree,
thank you
100%.
so much. This has just been great, and I've heard about the famous performance auditing intern, but this is my first time to actually, every time I talked with Dr. Creer about this as it was moving forward, it was, oh, by the way, our intern is doing this, our intern is, so it's really great to see, Casey, that you brought Kaylee Peterman here, and thank you so much for all your great work, so,
Well,
all right.
Speak to Casey as a boss. He's been an amazing mentor. He's helped me learn so much about qualitative and quantitative analysis. He's helped me figure out how to proceed in my career.
Good.
Yes.
A career that she's at the moment interested in, looking at the county moving forward. So there's potential there moving ahead. So there you go.
Good.
Well, KC and Kaylee.
Yeah, very good.
Casey's even better than I thought, because you're obviously have many strong suits, but he's gotten you to appreciate that he's done all this for you, but actually.
This is his strongest suit.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so
y'all.
much.
Appreciate it.
Great
Are we
job.
adjourned?
We are adjourned.